Evie sat perched on top of a large rock with her feet dangling into the lake water below her. Little ripples circled out over the shallow water that covered an array of colored stones. Looking up, she observed how she could not see the rainbow of stones a few meters in front of her. After a moment, she squinted at the dark tree line across the lake. She wondered what creatures lurked about in there, and if they minded that she was disturbing their home. She ought to leave just in case. She wouldn't want to be rude after all. With a sigh, she stood up on the rock before reaching her hands up above her with a satisfying crack resounding from spine. That felt amazing. Leaning down, she picked up her brown leather sandals before turning to the dirt pathway behind her. The covered and rough pathway would lead her back to the wood-log cabin on the edge of the woods. This was where she lived with her mum, Marie. As Evie walked slowly back home as she focused on the ground, wary of stepping on sharp rocks with her sandals still swinging by her side. She would hate to ruin another pair of shoes with her wet feet. And this was a new pair that she particularly liked. As she walked further, she could hear the patrol wolves running through the trees a few hundred meters to her left. So she quickened her pace until a small cottage appeared as the trees thinned out ahead of her. A smile graced her face at the sight of her mum sitting on the veranda with a white, knitted blanket draped over her frail shoulders. Marie's favorite spot was to sit on the veranda and enjoy the afternoon sun, waiting for her daughter's return after her daily walks through the wilderness. "Mom!" Evie shouted as she waved her arms in the arm with a wide grin across her face. The woman with the lined face looked up with a smile to greet her approaching daughter, despite being gone less than an hour. Evie had missed her mum. "Here, pumpkin. Did you have a good walk?" Evie's mum questioned as the two embraced in a loving and firm hug. "It was pretty good. What have you been doing?" Brushing aside the question, Evie focused on her mum. "I started a new painting. I really think it could be my masterpiece." A sparkle took over her eyes as she emphatically talked to her daughter. Marie had always enjoyed painting ever since Evie was a little girl. Aside from her daughter, Marie's greatest passion was painting. "That's great, Mom. I'm so glad. All pack members are to report to the main hall for dinner at 6. The Alpha has an announcement, and there are no excuses for not attending unless you are on patrol. All must adhere with this command." The strong and gruff voice of the Beta rang out in Evie's mind. "I guess we better start walking over then, in case anyone in the kitchen needs a helping hand, seeing as everyone will be eating together." Evie's mum stated as she stood up and grabbed the carved walking stick that rested against wall beside her chair. She had been using the walking stick for the last few years as her health had greatly deteriorated. Her mum's condition often weighed heavy on Evie's mind. But she pushed aside her worry for the moment. With a nod, Evie grabbed her arm to guide her down the veranda steps and along the path that led to the cluster of buildings where most of the pack members resided, along with the administration buildings, the child care center, and the communal resources. It was not really a proper path. More a line of grass worn down by the limited traffic that visited the home of Evie and Marie. Evie and her mum had lived on the outskirts of the small township for as long as she could remember, a unique personality. Her mum did not thrive living amongst her packmates, unlike most werewolves, and had stated many times before that she enjoyed having her own space away from everyone. Evie had previously wondered if she encroached in her mum's space. She hoped not. After all, she too did not do well spending too much time with others, and she understood the strain it took on her. The pair was suited to the quieter lifestyle. Her mum had moved out of the main settlement when she was pregnant with Evie, after her mate had disappeared, leaving her to be a single parent. Despite this great pain, she smiled every day and raised her daughter as well as she could. And to everyone around them in the pack, it was apparent that Marie had done a fantastic job, raising a caring and loving young woman. The two figures with linked arms walked for 10 minutes, chatting about Marie's newest project and the plans that Evie has for her new but flourishing garden. Before long, they were passing the outer buildings of the settlement, where most people in the pack lived in modest brick or timber homes. After another 5 minutes, they reached the building which housed the dining hall and kitchen, with a large garden situated behind it. Many families within the community relied on the garden for their fresh produce. As such, it was well cared for. Evie had considered volunteering to tend to the garden, but had decided she liked the freedom to tend to her own plants. It would be impossible to use up space in the communal garden with flowers. Evie and her mum slipped down the side of the building and entered the kitchen, which was bustling with people preparing for the evening meal, which already smelt amazing and made Evie's stomach grumble. Evie Marie, hello. My loves. Have you come to help your beloved cousin Joanne? The petite but loud head chef called out to them above the buzz of conversation and sounds of food being prepared. Yes, dear cousin. I assumed you might need an extra hand with the recent announcement. I assumed you would be very busy, Marie replied with a smile. Can you believe it? Absolutely no warning, just inconsiderate, I say. I do not know how the Alpha expects me to cater 300 people in 4 hours. Unbelievable. But I will try my very darndest to do it. After all, I am a culinary genius, Joanne proclaimed loudly as Evie giggled at her antics. Come on, my dear. You will prepare the vegetables that are going to be roasted, whilst your mother helps me with desserts. Joanne pulled Evie along to a workstation and thrust a sharp knife into her hand whilst gesturing to a huge pile of vegetables that sat waiting to be washed. Peeled and chopped up. I'll have it done in no time. Evie gave her a reassuring look before setting to the task in front of her. Soon she settled into a rhythm and the pile began to shrink at a rapid pace. As she worked away, she listened to the gossip and hubbub of the kitchen staff. She loved to listen and learn about their daily lives. Who had just found their mate? Who was expecting a baby, and so on. After a few minutes, a particular conversation piqued Evie's interest. I heard that the sons of the Alpha and Beta are returning. Apparently. The Alpha's son has found his mate and is going to present her to the pack. Can you believe it? After all of the searching and waiting, it is about time. One of the young kitchen hands chattered excitedly to her friend. If that is true. Then we will be preparing for a mating, celebrating, and crowning ceremony within the next few weeks. I was really looking forward to having a quiet few weeks with nothing on the calendar. The other kitchen hand replied with a groan, dreading the work that would arise if the rumor were true. It'll be fun. They'll invite other packs. And you never know, your mate might visit. The first kitchen hand raised her eyebrow suggestively at her friend. Evie tuned out when the two young women started discussing what they hoped their mates were like. She hoped soon that she would meet her own mate. Surely it was only a matter of months, if not weeks, considering she was approaching her 19th birthday. And werewolves were able to identify their mates when they turned 18. She remembered how excited she had been that few days after her birthday, so sure that she was only moments away from bumping into the love of her life. After a few weeks, this excitement had faded slightly, but Evie still dreamt about the day she would meet her mate. Looking down, she shook her head and focused on the task of slicing up the carrots in front of her before moving on to the potatoes and pumpkin. Before long, the huge pile of vegetables had been transformed into neat rows of sliced-up vegetables ready to be put into the large, industrial ovens. Satisfied with her work, Evie set off to see what other jobs Joanne had in store for her. Alrighty, what else do you need done? Evie questioned as she approached Joanne and her mother. The pair huddled together talking. No doubt they were gossiping about the ongoings in the pack like the two kitchen hands that Evie had eavesdropped on before. Pleasantly surprised, Joanne dragged Evie off and set her to a new task. After finishing up in the kitchen with all of Joanne's jobs completed, Evie and her mum slipped into the dining hall from a side entrance just a few minutes before 6 o'clock, being very wary of the Alpha's strict timeline. They hastily found their designated seats in the far left corner of the hall, at the end of one of the 4 long tables that stretched the length of the building. Low-ranked pack members like Evie and her mum sat toward the back of the room, the further back the lower the rank, whilst warriors and essential pack members sat closer to the front. It was considered an honor to sit close to the leaders and their family. As such, the very strongest pack members sat at the heads of the long tables, where occasionally they would enjoy conversation with the leaders and contribute their opinion to the running of the pack. The leaders sat at a long table horizontal to the rest of the tables, so the Alpha could look out over the pack from an elevated position. However, Evie doubted he would be able to spot her clearly considering how far back in the hall she sat. Other individuals that were situated at the head table include the Luna and the Alpha's children. They were joined by the Beta and his family, as well as the 3 strongest pack warriors who run the patrol schedules and the training schedules. Evie hardly ever trained. It was not deemed necessary that she know how to fight, considering her low status. If an attack did occur, it was expected that she find shelter in the dining hall along with the other lower-ranked pack members, the elderly, and the children. This arrangement was perfectly fine with her. She could not imagine hurting anyone. A hush fell over the crowd like a thick blanket as the Alpha and his Luna entered the hall from a door at the side of the large table, hand in hand. They ascended to their seats so that everyone could see them from their slightly elevated position. They were followed by the Beta and his mate, along with the three head warriors and their mates, one cradling a newborn infant. My pack. My family. I'm sure that you are all curious as to why I have called you here on such short notice. The Alpha's strong voice rang out across the hall, capturing the attention of absolutely everyone. It is a joyous occasion, my son. The future Alpha of our pack has returned with our future Beta and our future Luna. A thunderous applause broke out with hoots echoing around the high-roofed building at the Alpha's words. Everyone was absolutely ecstatic at the announcement. Yes. I too am overjoyed with this news. I know you will all welcome them home with arms wide. The Alpha opened his arms up and gestured to the side door he had entered through just minutes prior to three figures entering the room. A roar of excitement rose as they stepped forward, and they became more visible to the crowd. The future Alpha stepped forward and raised his hands to calm the buzzing crowd as the three figures moved to stand next to the current Alpha. I'm so glad to have returned home after a year of searching for my soulmate. I would like to introduce my mate, Ariel. I hope you come to love her as much as I do. I know that she is a perfect fit for our family and will become a great leader. So please welcome her to our home. He wrapped his arms around the tall and muscular female that stood to the side of him, causing another wave of applause to echo around the hall. I cannot wait to become your Luna at Blake's and serve the pack he loves so very much. I will do my very best to be the Luna that you deserve. Please do not hesitate to introduce yourself if you see me around and about. I am very excited to get to know you all, Ariel stated as she smiled out across the crowd in front of her. It was clear that she was going to be very beloved by the pack. At the back of the hall, Evie did not fully concentrate on the words spoken by her future Alpha and Luna. She was focused on the third member of the group, the future Beta, Adrian. He stood silently next to his companions with a straight face, seemingly unaffected by the warm welcome home. Evie was not surprised by this lack of emotion, considering that was how the current Beta presented himself, stiff, emotionless, and definitely intimidating. However, unlike the current Beta, Evie could not look away from his son. She was confused as to why she felt this pull to the tall blonde, considering she had found it difficult to interact with the current Beta several times in the past, simply due to his high rank and intimidating persona. She shook her head and tried to focus on what the Alpha was saying. Soon I will hand over the reins to my son and his mate. I am sure all of you are just as excited for this as I am. For now. Though, enjoy the food and be sure to thank the kitchen staff who have put together a delicious meal with very short notice. Finishing his speech, the Alpha sat down, and kitchen staff entered the hall with large plates of roasted vegetables, piles of meat, and many other mouth-watering foods. Evie sat patiently waiting with her mum and chattered with her table's mates as they waited for the food to be brought to the back of the hall. No doubt it would be a wait considering they served food from the front of the hall to the back. Evie hoped it was not cooled by the time it got to them. As she waited, her gaze fell to the front of the room where the leaders all seemed to be engaged in a thrilling conversation with future Luna Ariel. It looked as though the leaders were all keen to converse with the new pack member. Evie's eyes focused on Adrian again as a frown settled on her face. The blonde's head rose to meet her gaze. A look of shock briefly shot across his features before it was replaced by what Evie could only describe as bordering on anger. She quickly broke eye contact and turned to re-engage with the conversation going on around her. However, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Adrian exit the dining hall. Weird, she thought. She shrugged before turning to contribute her opinion on what was the best cake flavor to debate her mum was having with another middle-aged woman named Cindy. Evie rocked back onto her heels and wiped the sweat off of her forehead before admiring the neat row of tomato plants she had planted in her flourishing garden. She was proud about how well it was progressing, considering she only began gardening a little over a year ago. Throughout that time, it had become a good source of fresh produce as well as becoming her haven from the rest of the world. After a long day, she loved to retreat to her little piece of paradise. And today was an especially long and busy day. She had woken up early to help Joanne prepare breakfast because one of the kitchen assistants had called in sick the night beforehand. Afterwards, she stopped by the daycare center to drop off some cookies she snuck out before Joanne could see them. The kids had been very excited to see her, more than usual considering that she bore cookies. After eating the cookies, They had all played an intense game of tag that caused the area to be filled with joyful giggles. After playing with them, she headed to the general store to pick up some supplies that she noticed they were running low on at home, as well as ordering in some new art supplies for her mum's upcoming birthday. In all, it had been a tiring day so far, and Evie was looking forward to a quieter evening. Standing up, she gathered her gardening equipment up in her arms and put them away in the little tin shed that leaned against the side of the cabin. She made her way inside and grabbed a glass of water to quench her thirst. "Hey, Mum. I'm going to go for my walk soon. Do you need anything before I go?" Evie yelled out to her mum, who was painting in her studio at the back of the cabin. "There's a letter on the kitchen bench. Can you swing past the postbox and drop it off for me, sweetie?" Evie's mum called back. "No problem. I'll see you later," Evie replied as she scooped up said letter and headed towards the front door. "Love you, sweetie." Evie faintly heard her mum as the door swung closed behind her. She hummed to herself as she strolled towards the postbox that was located next to the administration building at the center of the cluster of buildings in front of her. She swiftly deposited it, giving a smile to everyone that she passed. Afterwards, she headed to the closest path leading to the woods. As soon as she stepped under the cover of the trees, it felt as though a weight had been lifted off of her shoulders. Solitude at last. She was practically surrounded by people all day long, and it was weighing on her. Finally, having a moment to think without interruption brought a genuine smile to her face. After walking for a good 15 minutes, Evie broke through the tree line on the opposite side of the lake that she had been on yesterday. From this position, she could see her rock she often sat on and the path that would lead her back home. Deciding to take a longer walk today, Evie set her eyes on another path a few hundred meters to her left that looped around, through a clearing, and back toward the direction of the cottage. She started down this path with a small smile whilst listening to the chirps of birds that fluttered above her and the rustling of leaves at her feet. Before long, she found herself in the small clearing filled with wispy grass and dotted with a few yellow and white flowers. At this time of the year, it was truly beautiful and was one of Evie's favorite places to visit. She doubted that even if she gardened for 100 years, she would be able to grow such lovely plants as the ones that grew here. Moving to the center of the opening, she slipped off her thin, lavender-colored cardigan and laid it flat on the ground, crafting a makeshift pillow, lying her head on the piece of fabric. Evie closed her eyes and enjoyed the soft sun rays that warmed her face. Content in her position, she slowly began to slip into a light doze with the sound of the trees rustling, lulling her to sleep. Suddenly sensing an approaching presence, Evie sat up with a start. She spun her head in both directions, almost like an owl, before her eyes landed on two wolves, stepping out of the tree line and approaching her. She instantly recognized their auras and identified them as future Alpha Blake and future Beta Adrian. Jumping up, she bowed her head in respect to the wolves as they stalked forward. A short grunt signaled for her to look up and meet the gaze of Blake before she once again looked down at the ground. As the two wolves moved even closer, Evie felt her chest tighten, and an intense feeling arose in her to look at the Beta. The thought, the need, practically echoing throughout her head. Slowly, she let her eyes fall on his light gray form and move up to his face. The previous night, she had been unable to identify this need to look at Adrian, a need that was now undeniable. Now, standing in this field with the sky about to become dark, she could clearly identify the feeling that she was experiencing. "Mate." Evie let out a small whisper. Finally, she had met her mate. Blake seemed taken aback as his Beta stared at the small girl in front of them. Adrian turned to face him, and it seemed to Evie that they were talking about what? She was not sure. After a few seconds, they both shifted back into their human forms. Up close, she realized how small she really was compared to the towering pair. Adrian reached out to the shocked brunette that stood in front of him. Evie was hesitant but reached out to grasp his hand in return. "What is your name?" Evie almost crumbled at his deep voice that seemed to resonate throughout her whole body. "Evie. Evie Harmons." Her voice was barely over a whisper. So quiet she wasn't even sure that Adrian had heard her reply. "I'm sorry, Evie, but you are not my mate. I, Beta Adrian Alfort of the Emerald Eye Pack, reject you, Evie Harmons, as my mate. Our souls will never be one." Adrian's eyes were stony and determined as the words left his mouth, not even giving Evie the chance to comprehend what was happening. He wrenched his hand from her grasp as he began to turn away from her frozen figure. It was not until a pain ripped through her chest, making her feel as though she was being turned inside out. Did she realize what was happening? No. Please no, do not do this to me, please give me a chance. Evie screamed as she fell to the ground, reaching a hand forward, trying to grab onto Adrian's hand as he began to walk away from her. Instead, Blake grasped her hand, preventing her from reaching Adrian. You cannot be his mate. You cannot be the beta female of this pack. You are too weak. I'm sorry that it has to be this way, but as the future alpha, I cannot allow it. The pack deserves better than you. You cannot even fight. Blake's voice was even colder than Adrian's had been. He tossed Evie to the side as she stared up at him through watery eyes. He turned and followed his beta back to the township, leaving behind the broken girl. Evie laid on the ground, not able to make a sound, as the intense pain grew beyond what she thought was possible. Why was this happening to her? Please. Someone help me. Our souls will never be one. Adrian. Please come back. I can be strong. Our souls will never be one. I can be strong. Our souls will never be one. It was not until hours later, when the moon hung high in the sky along with the glistening stars, that Evie was able to push herself up on her wobbly arms and get to her feet. She staggered back in the dark, hoping desperately that she was headed in the right direction to get home. Her mind was too frazzled to really comprehend and understand where she was and where she needed to be. Her eyes were blinded by tears, causing her to trip over a tree branch and slam back into the ground, having only taken a dozen steps forward. She cried out harder as her hands and knees stung with the impact, having broken her fall. She began to pull herself forward along the uneven ground, unable to stand up again. It was a pathetic attempt at an army crawl, though. After only traveling, she stopped and rolled over to stare up at the sky above her. With an accusing glare, she looked at the moon, feeling utterly betrayed. You were supposed to bind me to someone who would love and protect me forever. Why? Why is this happening to me? Please, moon goddess, make the pain stop. Please, I will do anything. I just want the pain to stop. Worn out by her desperate plea, Evie's eyes began to slowly close, giving in to the tiredness that was consuming her. She was ready to fall into a pit and never climb out. Evie, Evie, is that you? A voice called in the distance. With great effort, Evie opened her eyes to see the concerned face of Joanne hovering above her. Oh my God, Evie. Your mum and I have been so worried about you. What happened? Why are you still out here all by yourself? Joanne's hands hovered over Evie's tear-streaked face as a flurry of worried questions spewed from her mouth. Joanne feared that if she handled the battered girl, that she would shatter into a million pieces. Please. Joanne. Help me. Evie managed to croak out. Oh. Baby girl. It's going to be okay. Don't worry. I'm going to take you home now, Joanne said as she wrapped Evie's scratched arm around her neck and stood up to pull the limp Evie upright. This was a difficult feat, even though Evie was petite. Joanne was even smaller. Slowly, the pair silently made their way, the small cottage Evie called home. Not once did Joanne complain about the weight of her companion, rather she just pushed onwards. When the small building came into view, Evie could make out her mum standing on the veranda, waiting for her cousin and daughter to return. With a gasp, Marie hurried down the steps as fast as her walking stick would allow to embrace her hollow-eyed child. She wondered what could have possibly happened to make her lively daughter look so dead inside. None of the possibilities swirling around in her head were worse than the truth, though. Oh. My baby. My sweet pumpkin. What happened? Look at you. My baby. Marie cried out as the weight of Evie's limp body pulled them both to the damp ground. With a gasp, Joanne tried to catch the falling pair but was also brought down to the ground. Mummy. My mate. He rejected me. It hurts so bad. Mummy, please. Please make it stop. It hurts so bad. Please, Mummy, help me. Evie choked out with gasping breaths. But this was not a pain that could be relieved by a kiss and a band-aid from her mum. No, not my baby. No, please. Not my baby. Marie cried out as she pulled Evie even closer to her chest. Joanne gasped out in shock and encircled Evie and Marie in her arms to hold their family tight together. The three women sat on the grass with tears streaking down their faces as the moon watched over them until the sun slowly began to rise over the trees behind them and exhaustion overtook Evie, causing her to pass out. Marie. Let's bring her inside and put her to bed now. She needs her rest if she is going to survive this. Joanne broke the silence that had engulfed the women for a long time. Okay. Marie's broke voice was a mere whisper that could barely be heard over the chirping of the morning birds that were starting to wake up. She did not know how she would put Evie back together after suffering such pain. Together. The two cousins managed to maneuver the unconscious girl into the house and into her bed, utterly broken. Marie sat on the edge of the bed, stroking her daughter's hair after pulling up the quilt to cover Evie's shoulders. Why is this happening again, Joanne? What did I do to cause such pain to my daughter? Marie cried out softly, causing Joanne to reach forward to embrace her before the guilt consumed her. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. Evie does not deserve this, just as you do not deserve to be reliving this pain through her. We need to stay strong for her. You know that she is going to suffer immensely. And it is our duty as her family to hold her upright until she can stand up for herself again. You can do this. We can do this. Because if we don't... Joanne trailed off, her unspoken thought lingering in the air around them. I know. I will be strong for my daughter. I will. Marie stated with a determined look as she looked lovingly down on her sleeping daughter. Good. Come on. You need sleep as well. We will be here when she wakes up. Joanne gently pulled Marie up and towards the door. Turning back slightly, Marie whispered back to her sleeping child. I love you, Pumpkin. Evie groaned and rolled over to snuggle down under her blanket. There were a short few moments of bliss before she remembered the rejection. Pain ripped through her body as she recalled the events of yesterday. Our souls will never be one. Please no, ah. A scream was ripped through her throat as a sweeping relaying. Burning pain spread out from her chest. The door slammed open. And her mum and Joanne rushed into the room to hold Evie close, waiting for the pain to subside. After an hour, Evie was finally able to suck in a deep breath and turn to face her mum. They did not speak and simply stared at each other with tears and hurt filling their eyes. After a few minutes, Joanne spoke. Come, Evie. Let's get you something to eat and drink. You must keep your strength up and begin to move around soon, otherwise you may never leave that bed. Joanne said with determination and a look that did not invite disagreement. As much as she wanted to sink into the bed and go for an eternal sleep, Evie knew that Joanne was right. She did not want this to be the end of herself. With a stoic nod, Evie turned so her legs hung over the edge of her bed and brushed the wooden floorboards. As she was about to stand, Joanne held out a hand to assist Evie to stand. You can't stay in bed. But that doesn't mean that we can't help you through this. Take my hand and I'll steady you. Joanne spoke, trying not to let her voice crack. Together, Evie and Joanne made their way to the kitchen as Marie trailed behind them with a worried expression ever present on her face. Gently, Joanne sat Evie down at the dining table before moving to the kitchen to grab a bowl of broth. As the steaming bowl was placed in front of her, Evie gave an appreciative smile to Joanne. Together, the three of them sat at the table in silence until Evie pushed away the bowl with only a dribble of broth left in the bottom. Joanne nodded approvingly before clearing away the dishes before sitting down again. Pumpkin, I know that you are in immense pain right now, but I think that you ought to tell us exactly what happened. I know that is the last thing that you want to discuss, but I think that is important we know in order to keep you safe. Evie's mother reached out gently to grab her daughter's hand as she spoke. I'm scared, Mum, Evie whispered. I know, Pumpkin. But you are strong enough to overcome this, and if sometimes you are not strong enough, I will be strong enough for you, Marie stated with absolute love for her broken child. Okay. I was on my walk, and I went to the field. The one with all of the pretty flowers. I laid down to rest and I fell asleep for a second or two, I don't know. Evie began with encouraging nods coming from her mum and Joanne. I woke up because I sensed someone coming. Future Alpha Blake and Beta Adrian. Adrian, hey? He is. Evie choked up, not being able to say the words. He is your mate. Joanne stated what Evie had been unable to say. All he did was reject me. Nothing else. He said I was not his mate and that he was sorry. I tried to stop him, but Blake grabbed my hand. He said that I was not strong enough to become a leader of the pack, not strong enough to be Adrian's mate. Am I that weak, Mum? Evie cried out to her mum. Of course. Not baby. The leaders of this pack. They just don't understand what real strength is, Pumpkin. You are strong. You are the strongest person I know. If anything, it is those idiots that are the weak ones. Marie comforted her daughter, venom leaking into her voice. What do I do now? I'm scared that I am not strong enough to carry this with me for the rest of my life. Evie questioned her mother with big, tearful eyes. Oh, baby. I wish I could tell you what comes next. But everyone's story is different. But I think that it is time I told you my story. I haven't always been truthful with you, but only because I wanted to protect you from the world. Marie confessed to her daughter. What is it, Mum? Evie asked, confused. Joanne placed a comforting hand on her cousin's shoulder, giving a nod to continue. It's about your father. A young Marie ran through the woods, laughing and giggling with glee, as a young Joanne chased her through the trees as light filtered down around them. Come back, cousin, Joanne called out to the figure in front of her that seemed to glide across the ground ahead of her. Haha, you have to catch me, silly. Or are you too slow? Marie called back with a teasing laugh at the frustrated girl behind her. Soon the two girls broke through the tree line, revealing a large lake close to the territory border of the Emerald Eye Pack. Marie finally slowed down to a stop, which allowed a panting Joanne to catch up. You are just too fast. I don't understand how you do it, Joanne panted out as she bent over to rest her hands on her knees. Haha, don't be silly, wait. Can you feel that? Marie's nature quickly changed as she stood alert, her eyes darting all over the place, trying to locate the source of this feeling within her. What are talking about? I can't feel anything. Joanne gave her cousin a quizzical look as she too began to look around in an attempt to identify what Marie was talking about. Suddenly, a large reddy-brown wolf emerged from the tree line and approached the cousins. Mate, Joanne spoke clearly with a grin coming across her features. Oh, wow. Okay. I'll wait for you back at home. Joanne quickly turned and left her cousin with the wolf. Hi. My name is Marie. The brunette stepped forward to greet her mate with open arms. He transformed back into his human form to reveal the future alpha of the Emerald Eye Pack, Darren. Hello, my little mate, Darren said as he quickly stepped forward to wrap his mate up in his arms and plant a breathtaking kiss on her mouth. Marie melted into the arms of her mate, relieved to have met her soulmate so soon after her 18th birthday, which had only been a few days ago. Marie awoke in the morning and looked around to locate her mate. After a few seconds of panic, she spotted him standing at the edge of the lake with his back turned to her. Darren. Marie called out to her mate whilst clutching her clothes in front of her to cover her chest and bottom half. Startled, the man turned to see his mate sitting up looking at him. We can't be together, Darren stated harshly. What? But we slept together. We are mates. It has been determined by the moon goddess. Marie stuttered out in confusion. You are too weak to lead this pack, and there is no way that you can make me happy. I'm going to accept an offer to mate with the daughter of the Raven Ridge Alpha. She will lead this pack and give me strong pups. You will never be able to do that. Darren determinedly looked Marie straight in the eye. I did. Darren Jonas, future alpha of the Emerald Eye Pack. Reject you. Marie Hammonds. Our souls will never be one, Darren stated before turning and retreating back into the woods. Marie sat there naked until the pain hit and she started thrashing around on the ground, screaming in pain. Joanne found me a few hours later. Marie finished looking at her daughter, who appeared to be in shock. But I thought that my father, your mate, ran away and you never saw him again. Evie looked at her mother in confusion. Alpha Darren is your father, Pumpkin. I'm sorry that I lied to you all this time. But I just wanted you to be safe. Marie cried out as tears began to overflow from her eyes. It's okay, Mummy. I understand. I understand. Evie quickly wrapped her mum up in her arms. No, baby, it is not okay. You have been burdened with rejection and the pain that accompanies it. I will not let you suffer as I have suffered all of these years, watching my mate love another and raise children with another. I stayed foolishly thinking that he would come back to me and the child he left me with. But he didn't, and I have had to watch from the sidelines with my only respite being you. You will not go through the same thing. I won't allow it. Pumpkin. You are not going to like the idea. But I think it is best if you leave the pack. The further you can go, the more stretched the mate bond will be, and it will become weakened. My body has become weakened after years of enduring unfulfilled mate bond. You cannot go through the same thing. You have to leave. Marie stated with regret but determination. No, Mummy, I can't leave you. How could I possibly ever leave you? Evie jerked back from her mum's grasp in shock. Evie, I have seen your mum wither under the pressure of the bond, but she did not leave even though I begged her to save herself. I could not bear to watch you suffer the same fate. Joanne interjected, reaching out to hold onto Evie's hand. Looking back and forth between her mum and Joanne, Evie knew she had to leave, but the thought pained her almost as much as the rejection had. I know. But how will I survive without your guys? Evie stated. Oh, Pumpkin, you will always have us. We will call every day and we will come and visit you wherever you are as often as we possibly can, Marie stated as she threw her arms around her daughter and cousin. It's going to be okay, Evie, Joanne whispered in Evie's ear. Over the next few days, the three women gathered the necessary provisions that Evie might need. They had decided that Evie would travel to the Three Mountain Pack and speak to Alpha Ian, a distant cousin. They hoped he would be able to take in Evie but could not ask him in advance, fearing that it would get back to their own Alpha before Evie left. Instead, Marie and Joanne had written a letter of introduction to Alpha Ian, asking him to provide Evie with shelter and help her through the rejection. Throughout this time, Evie began to say her goodbyes, although she wished she could do it properly. Instead, she quietly visited the child care center one last time, this time with a bag full of lollies. She had to discreetly wipe away her tears as she exited the building for the last time. After that, she wandered around the outskirts of the town, avoiding contact with anyone but taking in the atmosphere and the buzz of people making their way through the streets. This had been her home all of her life. It was almost as though she was cutting out a piece of her soul, having to leave it all behind. With a sigh, she turned to go back home and tend to her garden. She had left strict instructions for her mum on when to harvest the vegetables that were growing. After that, her mum could do with the small patch what she liked. Evie had a sneaking suspicion that it would become a patch of flowers in the next few months, if she was lucky. She might be able to start another garden at the Three Mountain Pack that would give her purpose and will to push through the next couple of months, surely. She spent the next few hours tending to the garden, wanting to leave her mum with as little work as possible, knowing how weak she had been lately. It was slower progress than usual. Evie finding that she had to take regular breaks when a sharp, stabbing pain would hit her for a minute or two before receding, a side effect of the rejection. Eventually, she finished up and moved into the house in order to clean up and have a shower. Afterwards, Evie went to see her mum in her studio. She stood in the doorway admiring her mum as she sat at a canvas, painting a landscape image that was similar to the woods that surrounded their small cabin. Marie turned around to face her daughter as she was disturbed by squeaking of the floorboards. Oh. Hi, Pumpkin. All done outside? Marie questioned. Yeah. I'm going to miss gardening. I know you will take good care of it, though. Evie sighed out. I'm sure you'll be able to help out in the vegetable garden at Three Mountain. Last time I spoke to Ian, he was busy helping a few pack members set it up, and it sounded wonderful. I promise I'll try my best not to let all of your plants die, but no promises, my love. Marie comforted Evie as she stood up from her easel and began to clean up some of her brushes. Yeah. I know, Mum, Evie said with a small ghost of a smile. Come one. Joanne should be here soon. And we will have dinner. You need to have a good night's rest before tomorrow. Have you got all of your things together? Marie said as the pair turned and walked towards the kitchen. Pretty much, Evie whispered quietly before sitting down at the kitchen table. I know that you don't want to leave, but soon I'll come and visit you, Marie said, trying to comfort Evie. Can't you come with me, Mum? Evie begged. Oh, honey, I wish I could. But after so long of living near Darren, I don't think I would be able to survive leaving permanently. That's why you have to go before the bond becomes too strong and you can never leave like me. Marie spoke words that Evie already knew but did not want to believe. In less than a week's time, not only had she lost her soulmate, but she was losing the only family she had ever known. I know, Mum. Evie relented before the pair slipped into a comfortable silence, enjoying each other's presence before they would be separated. Suddenly, Joanne burst through the front door. Red-faced and puffing, she tried to speak. The Alpha. He knows. He knows that you're leaving, Evie. Someone saw me buying a train ticket in the human town. They must have told the Alpha. Evie, I'm so sorry. I should have been more careful. I'm sorry. You need to leave right now before he can stop you. If you don't leave, they will throw you in a cell and then you'll never be able to leave. Joanne spoke quickly and desperately as she grabbed onto Evie's shoulders. What? No, I have until tomorrow. You said I had until tomorrow. Evie cried out. I'm so sorry, Pumpkin. You need to go now. He is probably already on the way. Run to the human town and go to the train station. There should be a train that you can catch that will take you in the right direction. Please, baby. Now. I thought we had more time. But you need to get to safety. Marie sat up straight and directed her daughter. Hurriedly, the three women gathered Evie's backpack and small duffel bag before moving toward the back door of the house. Mum, Evie croaked out. I know, Pumpkin. I'll talk to you soon. You can always call me. Marie kissed her daughter's cheek and gave her a firm nod, trying to stop the tears from overflowing. Everything is going to be okay. Joanne gave Evie a firm but quick hug. Now go quickly, Marie said in farewell. Goodbye. I love you both so much, Evie said before turning and running to the tree line. Joanne and Marie stood hugging in the doorway, watching Evie's figure disappear before moving to the front veranda. It was only a few minutes later when the two spotted the approaching Alpha. He looked furious. Where is she? He roared out at Joanne and Marie. It isn't really any of your business, is it now? Joanne spat back at the fuming Alpha. Not any of my business, huh? Is this not my pack? And now I hear that there is a pack member who has left without permission to God knows where. This is my business, Joanne. So, I'll ask once again. Where is she? Alpha Darren demanded as he stepped towards the cousins. You're too late. She is already gone. Marie spoke quietly, looking down at the ground. The border patrol will catch her and drag her back to face a proper punishment. This is unacceptable. The Alpha stated before his eyes glazed over, presumably to alert the patrol to be on alert for any wolves trying to leave the pack territory. No, I will not let my daughter face the same fate as me. Please, you have to let her go. She has a life to live, and you would take that away from her. From your own blood. Marie stepped forward, begging the Alpha. She is not my daughter, you slut. Alpha Darren grasped Marie around the neck and lifted her up so only her toes brushed the ground. Joanne gasped and ran forward to try and free Marie before the Alpha threw her to the side. You will both be punished for this, he stated before shifting and running in the direction Evie had left. Joanne wrapped her arms around Marie, who was now sobbing on the ground. Praying that Evie had managed to leave before getting captured, Evie ran through the woods, panting hard as the trees whipped past her. Occasionally stumbling over the uneven ground, she could hear the howls of the patrol wolves behind her. And they were getting louder and louder. She had to go faster, otherwise she would be caught and punished severely. Imprisoned. Whipped. Starved. And who knew what else awaited her if she failed to escape the wolves giving chase at that moment. Determined not to let that happen, Evie pushed herself faster and faster. Desperate to reach the pack border and reach the human town, her legs burned and chest heaved. Seemingly, she could not get enough air into her lungs. Despite her increased speed, she could hear the sound of paws hitting the ground and chasing her down. Louder and louder. Closer and closer. Not much further now, she reassured herself. Ahead in the distance, she could see some lights appearing, indicating that it was the human town, but the wolves behind her were gaining faster and faster. Just a little further, she chanted in her head. At this point, she could practically feel the wolves breathing down her neck. Out of nowhere, a wolf skidded out of peripheral vision, straight into the line of her path, blocking her from escape. Its eyes were slitted and focused on her fast-approaching form. But Evie continued to increase her speed. The wolf ahead looked shocked but planted its paws firmly on the ground. At the very last second, just as she saw the wolf's muscle tense preparing to launch at her, she turned abruptly at a 90-degree angle, narrowly avoiding the attacking wolf as it launched through the air. Bursting through the tree line, she heard a set of jaws snap closed behind her, narrowly missing a strap hanging off of her backpack. Without turning around, Evie kept running forward to be sure she was far away from her former packmates, who were forbidden from going past this point. After stepping underneath a streetlight, she finally turned to see a few shadowy figures lurking behind the tree line. A sharp gasp escaped her mouth as Alpha Darren stepped forward with a grim look marring his face. Are you really going to leave your pack, your family? Come now, Evie, think about your poor, sickly mother. Who will take care of her if you leave? If you come back with me now, you will not be punished too severely. I promise it, Alpha Darren called out. Staying will only break me more. This is what I want. And it is what my mum wants. That is what a true and loving parent sacrifices for their child. Evie spat back, causing the alpha's face to morph into a sneering mess with his canines protruding. Without wasting another second on her former alpha, Evie turned around and hastily made her way towards the train station. As she had discussed with her mum and Joanne earlier in the day, she could see a few people still lingering around, remnants of the after-work rush. Evie guessed it was getting close to 6 in the evening, judging the quickly receding light that left her with a chill in her bones. Hastily, with regular glances over her shoulder to make sure that she was not being followed, Evie made her way into the train station ticket office. "Excuse me. I have this ticket for a train tomorrow. Is there any chance I can exchange it for a train tonight? I know it is last minute, but I really hope that you can help me out." Evie called out to a lady working the station who had her back turned to the girl. "Let me have a look, honey." "Alrighty. There is a train leaving in about 30 minutes that can take you to the next town over to this ticket. Once you get there, you can take another short trip to the station on your original ticket, and you'll just have to pay a small transfer fee. Is that okay?" The gray-haired lady smiled at Evie with the offer, clearly sensing the girl needed her kindness. "Yes, please. That would be so great." Evie nodded in agreement, very thankful that she would be leaving so soon. Swiftly, the lady performed the exchange and sent Evie on her way with a warming smile. The older lady hoped the young girl found her way safely. Judging by her frazzled appearance, she needed to leave as soon as possible. Hiking up her bags, Evie made her way to the right platform, grateful for the help she had been given. Before long, Evie's train pulled into the station, and she boarded with a relieved sigh. She would be free in mere moments. As the train headed out of the station, she could sense wolves running through the woods beside her, almost threatening that they will get her back one day. But for now, she was free, out of their grasp. It had taken Evie well over 2 hours to relax, finally assuring herself that her former pack would not hunt her down this far. This was difficult considering the paranoid thoughts racing in her mind, telling her that Alpha Darren would be waiting for her at the end of the journey, waiting to drag her back and lock her up. After convincing herself otherwise, Evie was able to lay her head against the headrest and close her eyes. She began drifting into sleep with Alpha Darren's words still echoing throughout her mind. Deep down, this fueled her guilt, feeling as though she had abandoned her mum and Joanne. How could she leave them to his rage? Eventually, her mind quietened as her body desperately needed sleep after her exhausting day and draining escape from the pack territory. She could dwell on the pit in her stomach when she woke up. After all, she assumed it would be a long time until this heavy feeling left her. Perhaps she would always be weighed down with this feeling, but not right now as her mind became muddled with sleep. She remained in that place between awake and asleep, picturing her mum painting her new masterpiece with a ghost of a smile on her lips, picturing Joanne shooing the pack children away from the cookies that were freshly pulled out from the oven to stop them burning themselves, picturing the paths she would usually follow on her afternoon walks through green canopies and small fields of wildflowers. Evie kept dreaming peacefully for the next hour, and the train traveled over the tracks, creating a regular and soothing rhythm, one clack followed by another clack. The carriage quieted as the other passengers followed Evie's lead and slipped into slumber as the night outside became darker. But shortly afterwards, Evie began to toss and turn, becoming disturbed from her previously peaceful state. Whipping her head back and forth, she sat up in her seat, back straight like a ruler, as a nauseous feeling overcame her and crawled up the back of her throat, realizing that within seconds she would empty the contents of her gut. Evie lurched into the aisle and stumbled toward the tiny toilet located at the far end of the cabin. Just as the door slammed closed behind her, acidic and watery vomit burst forth from her mouth into the toilet bowl. Snot leaked from her nose, and tears dripped from her scrunched-up eyes as she continued to painfully gag, but did not throw anything up. This continued for minutes that seemed to stretch for hours on endless hours. Dry, abdominals clenching, face screwed up tightly. Finally, relief came over Evie and she was able to lean back and slide down onto the ground with her knees against her chest. Her head was thrown back, with her eyes still closed, trying to recuperate herself. Finally having a moment of clarity, Evie came to the realization what had caused her sudden and violent illness. It could only be Adrian. He He had moved on in a big and definitive way. He had slept with someone. He was making a statement to Evie. She was certain. He was saying that there was absolutely no way that they could ever recover their mate bond. No way that he would ever hold her in his arms and tell her that he loved every aspect of her. This caused another wave of nausea to overtake Evie, and a tightness in her chest restricted her breathing. Coming to understand what he was communicating to her, however, it was also at that exact moment. Evie knew without a doubt. She had made the right decision in leaving him and the rest of the Emerald Eye pack behind. Her actions given veracity. Evie stood up from the dirty floor of the cubicle and turned to face herself in the mirror. She knew looking into the stained and scratched mirror that the next few months would be filled with difficult days as her conviction waxed and waned, but one thing was for certain. She would persevere. She would not always be this girl looking back at her in the mirror with a snotty, red, tear-stained face, dominated by sunken and dull eyes. One day, she would build herself back up, better than ever before. And it would not be to prove Adrian and Blake wrong, although they were. It would be to prove to herself that she was worthy of life and joy. It would be to prove to her mum that she had raised a strong woman who could endure hardships without the weight of them buckling her knees. Evie briskly rinsed off her face, pushing Adrian's actions out of her mind. She would not dwell on them or him. Instead, she opened the toilet door and began to make her way back to her designated seat, past the rows of sleeping passengers. Her head was held higher than it had been for the previous few days. Really. She held herself taller than she had for the past few years. A new Evie had been born in that toilet stall. No one, absolutely no one, was going to walk over this Evie. She was a new, proud, and strengthened Evie. Sitting down, she pulled her backpack up onto the seat next to her, unzipping it. She reached in, feeling around for the small, folded-up map that her mum had been sure to include when packing. Unfolding it, she located the markings Joanne had added with a red Sharpie in order for Evie to be able to identify the boundaries of the 3-mountain pack easily. Scanning her eyes over the paper, she spotted the town that she was currently headed towards. Quickly, she decided against catching another train to the next town over, deciding she would be better off hiking the distance to the packlands. Plus, she doubted that there would be any trains leaving in that direction by the time they arrived, judging by how late in the night it now was. Moreover, the walk would give her the opportunity to properly think over what she would say when she arrived, and was granted an audience with Alpha Ian, glancing down at the cheap, prepaid phone resting on top of the items in her backpack. Evie noted that it was approaching 11 o'clock at night. The train would be stopping within the next 30 minutes. Refreshed from her nap, even though it had been cut short, she concluded that she would probably be able to head straight to the pack boundaries. Her improved vision would allow her to travel in the woods without any issues, and hopefully she would be meeting with Alpha Ian early the next morning. Before long, the train pulled into the quiet station, and the tired passengers disembarked. Evie was one of the first to step onto the station platform. She headed directly out onto the lonely streets of the moderately sized town, glancing down at the map in her hands one last time before folding it up. She headed down the road, illuminated by the streetlights. In a matter of minutes, she stood at the edge of a nature reserve, ready to begin her journey to the 3-mountain pack, MAI, ready to start her new life. Traveling in the cool night, Evie felt relaxed to be on her own again. Not that she was not sitting by herself on the train, but now she was away from the eyes of the other passengers. And this relaxed her. She no longer felt as though she had to project a front for the benefit of those around her. She guessed from the amount of time that she had been walking. The sun would be coming up soon, and the animals of the woods would start to move around. At that thought, a loud rumbling erupted from her belly. She had not had the opportunity to have dinner the night before with the flurry of events that had occurred. Plus, she had thrown up the remaining food in her system whilst on the train. No wonder her body was signaling her to seek out breakfast. After a few seconds of consideration, Evie spotted a tall and strong-looking tree. It would be easy enough to relocate it if she left her things there. She extended her claws before jumping up as high as she could and digging them into the trunk, causing little bits of bark to fly through the air. Scrambling up, she managed to perch herself on one of the lower and thicker branches, wrapping her legs around it. Evie carefully removed her backpack and duffel from over her shoulders, Stuffing them against the trunk and sharply angled branch, she was satisfied with their security and jumped a few meters back to the ground. She quickly stripped off her clothes and wrapped them up in her waterproof jacket. Conscious of the nip in the air, ensuring her clothes were safely located underneath another tree, so as not to signal anyone that her other, more precious belongings were up the opposite tree, Evie then shifted into her gray and brown speckled wolf. It had been a long time since she had shifted, being less dominant compared to other wolves. She did not often feel the urge to release her most primal side. Shaking out her body and legs, Evie began to adjust to her new form. Looking up, she saw that the sky was a less dark blue than it had been moments prior. Hurrying off, she sought out the perfect position to be waiting in for when the wood animals would emerge from their slumber. After stalking around, with her stomach low to the moist ground, Evie was finally able to pounce forward and catch a rabbit between her jaws. Quickly, she bit down hard in order to minimize the small creature's suffering. She always had found this part the worst aspect of hunting. Shaking her head, she chanted to herself that she was a new Evie, an Evie who would do what was necessary to survive. After a few moments, Evie was done her meal and her stomach ceased making noises. She hurriedly made her way back to where her belongings were stashed away. Having shifted back into her human form and slipped back into her clothes, Evie once again headed off in the direction of the 3 mountain pack. She admired the beauty of the landscape around her as she ascended and descended over several smaller bumps in the landscape. She could definitely see herself living in this environment. Really, she could see any wolf living in this kind of environment. It seemed to call out the most basic needs of her wolf. It was well and truly morning when Evie spotted her destination at the bottom of the decline she stood atop. The morning sun gently illuminated the small cluster of buildings that could only hold up to 80 people if Evie had to guess. Time to meet Alpha Ian, I supposes. Evie spoke to herself before slowly descending. She was not exactly sure where the pack boundary began, but she assumed that it would not be much further ahead. As she was about to step over a small stream, only about a meter wide, a voice called out to her, making her halt. Stop right there. You are about to enter 3 mountain pack territory without permission. You will be captured and punished for such a crime if you proceed. A half-clothed warrior stepped out from the trees, startling Evie and causing her jump backwards. What is your business here? The intimidating man commanded. I have a letter for Alpha Ian of the 3 mountain pack that I need to deliver. Evie spoke after having recovered from her shock. The Alpha does not hold audiences with rouges. Leave now before I make you. The warrior turned to leave, having dismissed the girl. It is from his cousins, Joanne and Marie. He must receive it. Evie called out to his turned back. Fine. Give it to me and I'll make sure he gets it. The warrior turned back, holding out his hand for the letter, seemingly wanting her to leave as quickly as possible. No. I'm sorry, but I must give it to him myself. Evie stood firm in her conviction. You do not trust me. The warrior scoffed at the petite brunette that stood before him. Why would I? I don't know you. I would never trust a stranger to carry out such an important task on my behalf. Evie scoffed back in return. She was the only person she could rely on anymore. Maybe before the events of the last few days, Evie would have given in and handed over the letter, trusting that it would reach its intended destination. But not anymore. The warrior's eyes became unfocused for a few seconds before he addressed Evie again. Fine. But you cannot enter our territory. You will wait here until the Alpha comes. He has meetings for the next hour, and you are not a priority of his. Don't do anything while you wait. Because we are watching. You'll be ripped apart if you so much as think about stepping across that stream. The warrior warned her before retreating back into the trees where Evie could no longer see him. But his threat was real. She could practically feel several pairs of eyes locked onto her every move. After a silent few moments, Evie relented and put down her bags. She sat down next to them and pulled her water bottle out, giving it a shake. She sighed, realizing that she was almost out of water. I'm just going to fill up my water bottle. Is that okay? Evie's question was met with silence. That was as good as a yes in her book. She knelt down next to the stream. It looked clean enough to drink. Gently, she half submerged her bottle into the water, watching as bubbles popped along the surface. She sat herself back down next her bags and leaned back against a tree behind her. May as well get comfortable if she was going to be waiting for a while. As she waited, Evie didn't think about anything in particular. She just soaked in the atmosphere, even though she still sensed an underlying tone of hostility from the invisible patrol wolves that were no doubt watching her. "You know, I got a phone call this morning." A voice broke through the sounds of the forest. Evie's head shot up to meet the eyes of who she presumed to be Alpha Ian. It was from Alpha Darren of the Emerald Eye Pack. He told me about a pack member who deserted and was last seen boarding a train which would bring her into the close proximity of my pack. Imagine my surprise when not even 20 minutes later I'm told that there is a rogue at my border claiming to have a letter from my cousins. Not a coincidence. I think. Evie. Ian raised an eyebrow at her as he spoke. No. Not a coincidence. Evie nodded in affirmation at his train of thoughts. "Well, can I have that letter now, please?" he asked her politely while stepping forward. Evie scrambled up to her feet, holding the letter out in front of her. She waited impatiently as he took his time reading the letter. Every now and again he would scratch his chin or mumble something that she could not hear. "Right. I see," the Alpha said as he folded the letter back up. Evie stood up straight, waiting for his answer. "Look, Evie, I am so sorry. I can't let you stay here as much as I want to, but if anyone from your old pack found out that you were here, they would destroy us. We are not big enough to fight them back. You are my family. But I have to think about my pack first. And judging from the phone call I got this morning, they will come here looking for you," Alpha Ian said with a look of sympathy. "What do I do then?" Evie asked him whilst trying to stop tears from running down her face. "I don't know how to fight them and protect myself. I have nowhere to go. No one to help me," she confessed softly. "Perhaps." "Do you have a map on you?" Ian asked the girl. Yeah, here." Evie sniffed, grabbing out her map and handing it over. Alpha Ian spread out the map and laid it down on the ground. Pulling a pen out of his pocket, he began to make marks over the map. "All right, follow this path here until you reach a wide river. Then turn directly east and follow the course of the river until you come upon a mountain that is taller than all of the other mountains you see. It should take you about a day to walk there. On the farthest north side of the mountain, you will find a warrior. Tell him that I sent you, and he might be able to offer you shelter for a little while. You'll be in an isolated area and not many people know that he lives there. So I doubt that Darren will search for you there. That is all the help I can offer you, unfortunately. Now, you need to leave. It's a risk for me to even talk to you right now." Alpha Ian turned away and retreated back onto his pack lands once he finished explaining the directions that Evie needed to follow. "Thank you," Evie said with sincerity before turning on her heels to follow the directions of Alpha Ian. For now, it seemed like her only option left. Evie figured if she maintained a good pace, provided that Alpha Ian's time estimate was accurate, she would reach this mysterious warrior before it got dark in the evening. At least she hoped so. Not wanting to spend a night in the woods. Plus, she didn't think she would last too long running on the little amount of sleep she had on the train, before the sun had even reached its peak in the clear sky. Evie arrived at the river that Alpha Ian had marked out on her map. At least she knew that she was headed in the right direction now. What awaited at the end of her journey? Now that was the real mystery. How did she know she could trust this warrior that Ian had described? How did she know that he would even be able to give her shelter? Would he be willing to give her shelter? Despite these questions, Evie knew that currently her only option was to follow the directions she had been given and hope everything would work out. Hence, hour after hour she just kept walking. Soon, her feet were tender and covered in angry blisters. Hence, she decided that she deserved a break. Approaching the edge of the slow-flowing river, she shrugged her backpack off and placed it next to her duffel bag a few meters away from the riverbank. Wincing in pain, she pulled her shoes off and lined them up neatly, hesitating when she saw blood had soaked through her socks. She gently but quickly removed the stained pair of socks. She shoved them into her shoes before hobbling down to the water's edge. She roughly rolled up the ends of her jeans before walking into the water far enough that her ankles were also immersed in the icy water. A satisfied sigh escaped her lips at the instant relief that she felt. It was almost as though the swelling in her feet instantly decreased. For a stronger wolf, they would have been able to travel much further without this becoming a problem for them, and eventually, when their feet reached the same state as Evie, a short 20-minute break would allow them to fully heal. But Evie guessed she would need an hour or two, which she didn't really want to waste, and then be stuck in the wilderness overnight and by herself. So after only 5 minutes, She stepped out of the river and walked over to her bags. She had a few sips of water whilst waiting for her feet to dry. This gave her the opportunity to dig around her bag and pull her map, approximating from some of the larger landmarks that were marked out. She had a few hours to go. Eventually, she pulled her socks and shoes back on. Right in that moment, she would have done a lot of things for a soft, fluffy, new pair of socks. As she kept walking, small stabbing pains radiating from her chest plagued Evie. The mate bond. She wondered if Adrian was causing this pain by his actions during the moments when it flared up, or was it just a consequence of being rejected? Perhaps it was a combination of the two. Over the next few hours, the sun peaked before making its way down the behind Evie. Just as the last lingering bits of light were about to disappear, Evie spotted the mountain that Alpha Ian had described to her. She let out a cry of relief and increased her speed out of excitement. Hurrying alone, Evie's sharp awareness of her surroundings dulled as her mind was occupied with excitement from being so close to her destination. She hoped at least this warrior would be able to spare her a warm meal and a roof to sleep under for one night. She tried not to think too much further ahead like had when planning to join the 3-mountain pack. Evie doubted she could handle that again, having her hopes built up before they get demolished. Out of nowhere, Evie felt an impact from her left side, causing her to be thrown off her feet. Above her stood a red-eyed and ravenous rogue, completely disconnected from its human side. It was now a wild and dangerous animal. It had no soul to recognize the fear in the tiny brunette's eyes. Completely frozen, Evie stopped breathing, too terrified to think of how she could escape. She could feel its hot and putrid breath against her cheek as she turned her head to the side with her eyes clenched, tightly shut. Oh God, this was it. The rogue's paw raised up and slashed down at her face, cutting deep down across her face. She felt its claws scrape against the bones underlying her cheek and slice straight through her top and bottom lip. A scream ripped out of her mouth. Hot blood pooled on her tongue. She choked on the sensation. Coughing and spluttering, Evie pulled her knees up to her chest and thrust them forward with as much force she could. Whilst this was not a lot, considering her starvation, sleep deprivation, and now blood loss, it was enough to cause the rogue wolf to be shoved off of her. Rolling onto her stomach, Evie pushed herself up right into a low, crouching position. Blood drenched her shirt and dripped down onto the rough ground. She had gone through far too much over the last few days to get so close and then die at the hands of a rogue. No, she would not have. This would not be the end of her. The rogue seemed to sense her newfound determination to live. Evie let her claws and canines extend, and the rogue charged. She ducked left at last second. From the side. She pushed off the ground, hard to tackle it from the side, and swing herself around to put the outwitted rogue into a headlock. She needed to end this quickly. There was no way she would be able to hold the thrashing animal long enough and firm enough for it to pass out. Mumbling a quick apology, she dragged her clawed hand across the animal's exposed throat. It was dead. Evie had taken the life of another, but it was kill or be killed. The deed was done. But Evie did not have time to dwell. Her own life was still in danger, judging from the amount of blood still pouring out of the flaps of flesh hanging from her face. Quickly, she pulled off her jacket and pressed it against the wound, hoping to give her body enough pressure that clotting could begin. Too weak. She ruled out carrying her belongings with her and left them next to the dead rogue. Hurrying off, she knew her only chance at survival was making it to the home of the warrior she knew nothing about. Limbs burning with exertion, she pushed herself up the side of the mountain in front of her. She prayed to the moon goddess that this was the north side. After a few moments, she paused, head spinning and vision speckled with black dots. She tried to sniff out anything to help guide her. There, something just under the stench of her own blood. Running forward another 200 meters, with the jacket still pressed against her face. She spotted it. Thank you, goddess. Absolutely burnt out and knocking on death's door. She fell up the steps of the cabin. She smashed her hand against the door 3 times as hard as she could and promptly passed out. She welcomed the respite of pain. Evie woke up to the pain pulsing in her face. Slowly, she reached her hand up and felt the bandage that loosely covered the wounds. Slowly, she sat up on the bed she had been sleeping on. Looking around, she was in a small but cozy room filled with wooden carved furniture that blended into the wooden slate walls. On the far side of the room, a mirror was perched atop a low set of drawers. She gently lowered her feet to the ground. A low creak groaned out of the wood as she shifted herself into a standing position. Hesitantly, she made her way over to the mirror. Her hair had been brushed back into two loose ponytails that sat either side of the base of her skull. Someone had clearly wiped away the days of dirt and grime that had left her skin brown that last time she had seen her reflection in the river water. And there was a large white bandage sitting underneath her right eye down to her top lip. There was a smaller secondary bandage just right of center that sat on her chin. Slowly, she reached up and grasped the edge of the larger bandage, taking a few deep breaths through her nose in order to steady herself. She prepared to view the damage the rogue had done to her face. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Evie jumped back, startled by the unfamiliar voice. Whipping her head around, causing the pain in her face to intensify, she locked eyes with a tall man that stood in the doorway. His dark curls were pushed off of his forehead and green eyes looked at her with curiosity. "You should probably sit back down for now. You're still pretty weak, and I haven't really been able to get you to eat anything for the last few days," he said as he stepped forward. Evie's eyes bulged out when he said days. How long had she been out of it, almost sensing her question? The dark-haired man spoke. "You have been sleeping for the last 4 days," he said. The stranger stepped forward and carefully led Evie back to the bed. As she swung her legs back up, he helped her adjust the pillows to prop herself up and pulled the blanket over her small frame. "Pretty impressive what you did to that rogue," he said as he filled a cup with water and handed it to her. "Yeah. I smelt him all over you and went to finish him off. But I didn't need to. Quite a surprise, actually. I found your things, though," he stated, gesturing over to Evie's 2 bags. They were piled up in one of the corners that she had clearly missed before in her survey of the room. Looking back to the mystery man, she spotted the letter she had given to Alpha Ian in his hand. "Yeah. Sorry I looked through your belongings. Couldn't have a total stranger staying in my house without trying to figure out who they were just a little bit. Could I now?" he stated with a shrug of his shoulders. Evie thought that this was fair enough and that she probably would have done the same were they in opposite positions. "I do have a few questions, though. What is your name for a letter of introduction? It only really tells me who you're related to." "And alas, I do not know a Marie or Joanne," the man said. "If it helps any. My name is Curtis," the green-eyed man said. She thought a few seconds before answering. Was she even really Evie anymore? She did not think so. Deliberately, she opened her mouth, but she could only produce a soft grunting noise. Her vocal ligaments stiff after not being used for days. She tried again. "Eve." It was quiet, but Curtis heard it. "Well, Eve, I presume that Ian could not take you into his pack for some reason or another and sent you up here to me," Curtis stated. Eve nodded her head in affirmation of his assumption. "Is your previous pack still after you?" Curtis asked the question that she dreaded the most. There was no way that he would be willing to help her if she brought danger with her. Nevertheless, she still had to tell him the truth. He had a right to know if she was putting him in harm's way. Eve nodded her head in affirmation once again. "Right then. Here is what is going to happen next. In a few more days, your wounds should have nearly finished healing. After that, you are going to start training to fight. I can't let you stay here without being able to defend yourself. You'll just be a burden to me. Once you are proficient enough, I'll send you on your way. I do not know how long that will take. But in order to have a life again, you will need to be a warrior. There will be no complaints when I train you. You will do as I say. When I say, in the meantime, whilst I train you, you will help around the cabin. You are not going to be a freeloader. It will be hard work. There will be points when you want to give up. Don't. If you are not willing to do exactly what I have just said, you can go ahead and leave right now. Understand?" Curtis looked directly into Eve's eyes. He was beyond serious about every word he had just uttered. But she was too. "I understand," Eve managed to say strongly, despite the lack of stretch in her cheek. "Okay then, let me change the dressings on your face and then you can have something to eat," Curtis stated as he sat down on the edge of the bed. Carefully, he started to tug at the corner of the larger bandage. Eve winced in pain, breathing in and out steadily until Curtis sat back to observe the uncovered wound. "It will probably be all right to take out the stitches tomorrow afternoon. I was hoping you would still be asleep when it came time. It is going to hurt intensely. Do you want to see now?" Curtis questioned Eve. After a few seconds, she gave a firm nod, and Curtis helped her over to the mirror, reflected back at her. Was her face held together by over 24 individual stitches. The wounds had scabbed over, leaving 3 dark red lines running diagonally down her cheek, one continuing down through both her top and bottom lip. She could barely recognize her own face. Stitched you up as best I could, but you are going to have some impressive scars once you have healed up. Curtis broke the quietness of the room. Do you want me to cover it back up? He asked gently. Eve shook her head in denial. What would be the point? The damage had already been done. All right. Come down the hall to the left when you are ready. I've got some soup ready for you, he said before walking off. Eve looked at herself in the mirror. Curtis had removed the stitches 2 days ago, leaving her with tender pink lines running down her cheek. It could have been worse, though. The rogue could have killed her after all. Today was the first day of her training. Out of the window of the room that she had been staying in, she could see the sun beginning to rise. Realizing she had to leave, she turned and hurried down the hallway to the front of the cabin. She stopped to take a few deep breaths, attempting to calm herself before heading outside into the crisp air. Curtis was already outside waiting for her. We are going to run up the mountain to warm up for starters. I'll come with you today, but pay attention to the path we take because you will be running it yourself every day, Curtis said before turning and jogging off uphill. Eve took off after him, having to churn her legs faster than a jog to keep up with his long strides. For him, the movement looked graceful and effortless. Eve was sure if she could see herself in that moment, she would not be as impressed with her own form. Her cold muscles groaned at the demand. But after a few minutes of following behind Curtis, Eve managed to settle into a steady rhythm. Together, they ascended up the mountain over the rocky terrain. A few times Eve stumbled, but Curtis never looked back. After half an hour of this, Eve was not even sure they could classify what they were doing as running. It was more rock climbing up to the very peak of the mountain. The air was thinner and colder. The sharp sting in the air caused the dull ache in her face to intensify. At this rate, Eve doubted how much further she would be able to go before she passed out. Less than 2 minutes, less than 1 minute, thankfully. Curtis stopped just after that thought crossed her mind. Eve thanked the moon goddess as she crouched over, leaning her hands against her knees. You did well to keep up, Curtis said to her as he looked out over the expansive mountain range. Unable to find her voice to reply, Eve simply threw up a thumbs up in his general direction. She was more focused on moving air into her lungs. Take a minute break before we head back down. You'll want a clear head, so you don't end up snowballing the whole way back to the cabin, Curtis said as he turned back around. Once again, Eve only managed to throw up a thumbs up to reply to Curtis. Once she finally managed to look up, Eve had a moment to admire the view that stretched out in front of her. It was stunning, beyond stunning. The sun was still low on the horizon, but high enough that it seemed as though every tree was touched by the morning light. As a result, she could practically make out every shade of green down below. Far in the distance, she could see a twinkling lake in a clearing. She would bet anything that it was amazing up close. After a few moments of admiration, Eve turned back around to face Curtis, with a simple nod confirming that she had recovered and was ready to continue. The two started their descent. Curtis maintained the same speed as before, but it was now harder for Eve to keep up due to her exhaustion, combined with the need for concentration in order to prevent herself from rolling down to the bottom. She did not particularly want to add more scars to her growing collection. Despite all of her efforts, the distance between herself and Curtis kept growing and growing and growing. Soon she was making her way back to the cabin based on her memories of the path they had taken on the way up, as Curtis's figure had well and truly disappeared from her view. Slowing down slightly, she took a deep breath through her nose, trying to scent out the correct path to take. Following her nose, she finally made her way back to the cabin where Curtis stood waiting for her as he took a long gulp from a water bottle, slowing to a stop. Eve tried to catch her breath as her chest heaved up and down with great effort. Her legs were burning and her whole body felt sluggish. She wished she had pushed more to be involved in training at her previous pack. Don't worry. You'll build up your stamina soon enough. Stand up now and come over here. We are going to go over some basic self-defense moves and then we are finished for the day, Curtis said whilst gesturing for her to move, groaning in her head. Eve slowly followed Curtis over to a strong tree with a thick mat wrapped around it. It looked like it had been there for a long while, with various layers of duct tape being added to keep it in position. Curtis smacked his hand hard against the mat, causing a sound to echo through the surrounding area. All right, feet shoulder-width apart, left foot in front. Yep, just like that. Curtis nodded as Eve shuffled her feet into the correct position. Hold your hands up to cover your body and face. Make sure that you stay light on your feet. Put your weight through the balls of your feet. Curtis instructed her as he circled around her, observing her form from all angles. When you punch, twist through your hips and shoulders, putting all of your weight into it. You're small, so you are going to need to put everything into it if you are going to throw a punch. There is no opportunity to throw a second punch if you throw a weak first punch, Curtis said. He demonstrated the twisting movement with his own punch, hitting the tree with a loud crack despite the padding around the tree. Eve nodded her understanding, turning her head straight to face the tree. After a few seconds of consideration, she threw her hand forward, letting it snap forward to connect with the mat. Good. Again, Curtis demanded. She threw another punch out to hit the tree. Keep going until you have punched the tree 200 times. Make sure you maintain the technique I have shown you. Keep your punches strong even if it hurts, Curtis said before making his way over to the front steps of the cabin. There he sat down and began to take some more sips of his water. Eve turned back to the tree and began the task she had been set. 1. The impact echoed out. 2. Eve concentrated greatly on the twisting movement of her hips and shoulders. 3. This went on for probably about 10 minutes. At this point, Curtis instructed her to add a jab in front of the punch. She only had to do these 100 times. By the time she was finished, her knuckles were red with the top few layers of skin having been rubbed off. However, when she looked down, a sense of pride filled her at the marks that would probably fade by the end of the day. Well done. Come, have some breakfast and clean up. We will train again tomorrow, Curtis said as he stood from his position and headed through the front door. Over the last week, Eve's training had progressed in much the same manner as the first day. She would wake up early and run up the mountain each day. Despite the short time that she had been training, she was sure that she was getting quicker. It was certainly easier. After her run, Curtis would instruct her to strike the tree with the mat. Each day he would teach her the technique for 1 or 2 new moves, adding to her knowledge of fighting techniques. After 7 days of this, he was beginning to give her more complicated sequences of moves to practice. Occasionally, he would remind her to stay light on feet, or he would scold her for being too slow or too weak with her strikes. If he found her slipping, he would punish her. Her least favorite punishment so far had been the core exercises. She knew that her abdominal muscles were her weakest group, and she ought to train them more often. But she always hated doing it. That particular morning, Eve had been distracted, and as a result she ended up doing an ungodly amount of crunches, and she spent way too long in the planking position. But eventually, Curtis announced that they were finished for the morning. Although he was annoyed at Eve's lack of discipline, he briskly walked back to the house, leaving her outside on the ground. She was exhausted, partly due to the new training schedule and exercise that her body was still adjusting to. But the main culprit of her tiredness was a lack of sleep. Every night when she went to sleep, pain would rip through her body as she felt Adrian have intimate relations with whoever he was hooking up with. She tried not to scream out in the night, but she was almost certain that Curtis knew what was happening. After all, she had accidentally shredded a blanket in a fit of pain one night. Regretfully, she had presented the torn piece of fabric to Curtis with an apology. The two had not discussed what led to the blanket's end. With a groan, Eve rolled over and slowly limped into the cabin as her muscles called out in distress. Once inside, she hastily had a shower to remove the scent of sweat from her body before making her way to the kitchen. Curtis always made breakfast and she always made dinner. On a particular day, either one of them could end up making lunch. Eve enjoyed this task, though. She enjoyed the responsibility that she had been given. Plus, cooking always reminded her of Joanne. Just as Eve walked into the kitchen, Curtis sat down 2 plates of food on the table. There was a mixture of grilled vegetables accompanied by 2 slices of toast. Eagerly, Eve sat down and began to shovel the food into her mouth. One of the side effects of all the training she had been doing was the dramatic increase in food that Eve needed to consume in order to be satisfied. In the blink of an eye, all of the food on her plate had disappeared, and she made her way to the kitchen to begin cleaning up the dishes. Curtis remained seated at the table as he ate his breakfast in a much more dignified manner. After a moment of consideration, Eve spoke up. Curtis, is it all right if I ask you a question? Eve said gently. He grunted in reply, which Eve took to mean, spit it out. I told my mum I would call her when I was safe at Alpha Ian's pack, and well, that clearly didn't work out. Do you have a phone I could possibly borrow? Eve practically cringed as she spoke. No, Curtis said before continuing to eat. Oh, okay. Never mind. I guess. Eve said, disheartened as she turned back to the dishes. I'm going to the human town this afternoon. Usually, I would not need to go. But I did not plan on having a house guest. So I don't have enough food. I'll need to stock up. You can come with me and use a payphone, Curtis said as he stood from the table and placing his dirty dishes on the kitchen bench. He turned and retreated to his room as a wide smile came across Eve's face. The rest of the day went agonizingly slow as Eve tried to distract herself with a long list of chores. She prepared everything that was needed for what she had planned for dinner. She climbed up onto the cabin roof and cleared all of the leaves out of the gutters and off of the solar power panels. She used a small axe to chop up large pieces of wood into usable-sized chunks for the fireplace in the living area of the cabin that was adjoining to the dining and kitchen area. After that, she swept the floors throughout the majority of the cabin, only avoiding Curtis's room and office. She tended to stay out of his private spaces. She was already invading his home. She did not want to become even more bothersome. After completing those tasks, she whipped up a sandwich for her lunch and left another in the cupboard on the bench for when Curtis decided to emerge from his office. She wondered what he was doing in there, but she was not nearly curious enough to go and disturb him. As she finished up, Curtis walked into the kitchen and began to chomp down on his lunch. Go grab a coat and your shoes. We are going to leave after I finish this, Curtis said before chomping down on his sandwich again. Jumping up, Eve ran to pull on her shoes and jacket before barreling back into the kitchen. Curtis silently stood up and walked out of the front door with Eve hot on his heels. She practically bounced down the mountain behind Curtis. A few times she had to stop herself from crashing into his back. Soon the ground began to flatten out, and Eve was able to concentrate on her thoughts more. She could not wait to tell her mum everything that had happened since she had left in such a hurry. Although she thought that she would omit the rogue attack and the scars it had left her with. On reflection, she considered it a small price to pay for her freedom and life. Most of all, though, Eve wanted to let her mum know that she was safe. Curtis stopped and Eve came to a halt at his side. In front of them was a car covered by a dark green tarp. It was covered in leaves and clearly had not been moved lately. Curtis stepped forward and pulled the tarp back to reveal an old, beat-up ute. It had several large patches where paint had been chipped off and rust had set in. The passenger door had a rather sizable dent, and one of the side mirrors had a big crack running diagonally across it. Without a word, Curtis pulled a pair of keys from his pocket and unlocked the car as he jumped in the front seat. Come on, baby, he whispered as he turned the key in the ignition. The engine spluttered to life after a long few seconds. Eve had been dubious that it would turn on. With a shrug of her shoulders, she jumped into the passenger seat as Curtis revved the ute. It let out a loud roar, causing a smirk to spread across his face. With that, the two of them started down a small dirt road that discreetly merged with a bitumen highway. Eve watched the landscape fly past them as she sat back comfortably in her seat. The two companions traveled in a comfortable silence for an hour before they reached a moderately sized town. It was certainly bigger than the human town near the Emerald Eye Pack. Curtis soon pulled into a car park next to a shopping center. Come on. We will go shopping first, and then we can find that payphone for you to use, Curtis declared as he jumped out and headed into the building. After grabbing a trolley, the two headed to the fresh fruit and vegetable section. Curtis explained each time he came to grab supplies, he liked to purchase enough fresh produce to last a week. Any longer than that, and the food would go off. He encouraged Eve to grab any fruit or vegetables that she wanted now, because it would be another 2 months before she got the opportunity to eat fresh produce again. Quickly, she bagged up any fruits that caught her eye. As she dropped them into the trolley, she eyed a huge pile of potatoes that Curtis had picked out. But they last good and I like them. Curtis let out a huff and shrugged his shoulders at the curious expression Eve gave him. As they moved through the fresh produce section, Eve eyed a small stand of plants and succulents that was situated to the side of a stand full of lettuce heads. Without a word, Curtis walked over to the stand and picked up a small, greeny-gray succulent with slender leaves. He walked back over to Eve and the cart, pushing the potted plant into her hands. "Is this one good?" he asked her. "I mean, yeah, but why are you getting a plant?" Eve looked with her head tilted slightly to the side. "You should get it if it is good." Curtis reached out to take the succulent back and place it within the trolley. "You can't buy that for me," Eve exclaimed, reaching forward to take it out of the trolley. "I can actually. Plus, I have been wanting some more greenery around the kitchen," Curtis said as he blocked her from picking it up before moving on. Eve stood there, stunned for a second. She then continued after Curtis's retreating figure with a light smile gracing her face. Soon they moved on to pick up an insane amount of canned goods as well as baking staples. After that, they headed to the register to pay. Eve cringed at the amount as Curtis pulled out his wallet. She felt terrible and like a freeloader. Curtis brushed her off as they headed outside, as she promised she would find a way to pay him back. He said not to worry. But guilt ate her up. He was giving shelter, teaching her to defend herself, and buying her food, plus the little succulent he had added into the shopping trip for her benefit. It was a little hard not to worry about. After placing all of the groceries in the back seat of the ute, Curtis handed Eve a fistful of coins and directed her 2 blocks down where he said the payphone would be located. "What are you going to do?" Eve asked him. "I have a few things to pick up and I have to go past the post office to pick up my mail. But I will meet you back here in half an hour, okay?" Curtis said, prompting Eve to nod. "Remember, do not tell anyone where you have been or where you are calling from. And especially do not mention me. All they need to know is that you are fine." "Okay." Curtis eyed her, seriously trying to impart how important it was that she kept her mouth shut. Eve nodded solemnly at his words. With that, she headed off down the street, excitement practically leaking out her pores. Eve had practically skipped down the street until she reached the payphone box that was situated outside of a small library. She jumped inside and pushed a bunch of coins through the coin slot before depositing the rest in her pocket. Out of her other pocket, she pulled out a scrap of material with her mum's number written down. She knew it from memory but had been scared she would forget it for some unknown reason. Hence it was written down and shoved into her pocket. She punched in the numbers from memory, double-checking she was correct. As the phone rested between her ear and shoulder, the dial tone rang out in her ear. Eve was terrified that no one would pick up. However, after an agonizingly long wait, a voice spoke through the phone. "Hello," the voice said with a guarded tone. "Joanne, is that you? It's me." Eve replied. "Oh, Evie, I am so happy to hear from you. Why haven't you called sooner? Are you at 3 Mountain?" Joanne let out a volley of questions, relieved to hear from Eve. "I'm sorry things didn't go exactly to plan, so I couldn't call earlier, otherwise I would have. I have missed you so much. I'm not at Alpha Ian's pack. I can't tell you where I am, but I am safe. I promise." Eve replied, trying to reply to her multitude of questions. "Oh, honey, that is all I need to know. I have missed you as well. So much." Joanne cried out through the phone, bringing a tear to Eve's eye. "Is my mum there? Can I talk to her?" Eve asked Joanne. She was met with silence. "Joanne," Eve asked, concerned at the lack of response. "Baby, your mum. Alpha Darren has her locked up in the cells as punishment for not telling him where you went." Joanne slowly explained, trying to gently break the news to Eve. "Oh my God." Eve instantly felt as though she would throw up, and a hand flew to her mouth as if trying to stop the barrage of vomit that wanted to spew from her mouth. "Evie, baby, it is going to be okay. I have been visiting her as often as I can and she seems to be coping. And the Alpha said that they will let her go in a few days. She's fine. I promise." Joanne tried to comfort Eve. "Oh my God. This is all my fault. I shouldn't have left." Eve cried out as she was overcome with guilt. "No, don't you dare. Your mum and I knew what would happen. We both prepared to face this. We both wanted to protect you. So don't you dare feel guilty, baby. You stay strong and live your life in order to make your mum proud, to assure her that she made the right decision." Joanne said in a steady voice. "Okay. I'll try to make you proud. Eve said, her voice dripping with emotion. Still, she felt sick with guilt. You always make me proud. I have to go now. Alpha Darren has people watching me. I have to be careful. I love you, sweetie. Joanne said. I love you too. Tell Mum that I miss her so much. I'll talk to her soon. Eve said. Goodbye, my love, Joanne said before the phone cut off. It took Eve another minute to take the phone away from her ear and to put it back on the hook. She slowly made her way back down the street. Back to where Curtis had said that they would meet back up. She felt the chill in the air and wrapped her puffy jacket around her tighter. It was getting colder and colder. It would probably start snowing up in the mountains soon. By the time Eve made it back to where the car was parked outside of the shopping center, she was struggling to hold back the tears in her eyes. She took a few moments to compose herself, not wanting to cry when Curtis came back, but thoughts about her mum kept racing through her mind. What was she suffering through, after all? She was sure that Joanne had sugar-coated everything that she had said. Everything all right, Curtis said, breaking through Eve's daze. Yeah, all good here. Did you get everything done that you needed to? She replied whilst discreetly trying to wipe the corner of her eye. Yep. Alrighty then. Jump in, Curtis said before opening the driver's side door. Eve followed him and opened the passenger side door. The ute rumbled to life, and they exited the car park and headed back out of the town. The two companions stayed quiet as they passed by the blurred trees. The quietness didn't bother Eve as she was consumed by her thoughts of her conversation with Joanne. The sun was starting to get low in the late afternoon. Eve started to doze. Emotionally and mentally exhausted, her half-asleep mind reminisced about better times when she was little, when she would play outside with her mum when she wasn't limited by her walking stick. A small smile graced her sleeping face, unencumbered by memories of the last few weeks. But Eve's small smile began to slowly turn into a frown. She threw her head to the side and groaned out lowly in pain. Curtis glanced across to the side at the sound. Eve's face scrunched up and she suddenly jolted forward. Fully awake, a familiar pain started to build up, and weight pressed down on her chest, making it harder to get air into her lungs. Her hand grasped at her chest, trying to push off the invisible weight sitting on her chest. She let out a harsh cough. Are you okay? Curtis turned again towards Eve. Pull over. Please. Eve groaned out in response as the pain intensified and a wave of nausea rolled over her. Abruptly, Curtis jerked the wheel and harshly pressed down on the brake. Just as the vehicle came to a screeching halt, Eve pushed open the door and fell out onto the ground. Curtis raced around to pull her hair back as she retched onto the ground. She collapsed to the side as her whole body began to spasm and shake as the intensity of pain continued to increase. Curtis grabbed her, trying to prevent her from throwing her head back into the ground. Instead, he cradled her closely, trying to stop her from hurting herself. Eve, can you hear me? You have to relax. Curtis tried to break through to her. She could hear him, but she could not reply nor stop the jerking of her arms and legs. Her whole body was consumed in fiery pain. All she could do was look up at Curtis before the pain ceased and her eyes rolled back into her skull. A relieved sigh left Curtis as Eve's whole body went limp as the attack seemed to subside. Carefully, he gathered her up into his arms and put her back into the vehicle, making sure she was secure and in a comfortable position. He then returned to the driver's seat. Eve only briefly woke back up as Curtis was carrying her up the mountain and back to the cabin. He shushed her and she closed her eyes, overcome by exhaustion. It was not until the next morning when Eve fully regained consciousness. It was later than she usually woke, but it was clear that her body and mind needed time to recover from the previous day's ordeal, sitting up rapidly with shock. Eve fell out of bed whilst hurrying to get her training clothes on. She ran down the hall and into the kitchen where Curtis stood at the stove preparing breakfast. He turned to face her as she flew through to the back door before stopping. What are you doing? Eve said. Making breakfast. What are you doing? Curtis replied as he cocked his head to the side. Going outside to train. I slept late. I thought you would have been outside training already. Eve stated, confused. Training? No. Not today. You should rest today. It was a long day yesterday and you deserve a break. Curtis replied as he turned back to the food he was cooking. A break? I don't need a break. If anything, yesterday proves that I need to train even harder. It proves that I need to get stronger in order to not succumb to the mate bond. I need to train. Eve said, I understand how you're feeling. How about we make a deal? Sit down and have breakfast now. Later we shift and go for a nice run. I know it has to been a long while since you have stretched out your wolf's legs. Curtis tried to make a bargain. No. We train now like every other day since I have come here. Eve put her foot down, denying Curtis any wiggle room. Okay. But if you feel anything wrong, you have to tell me straight away, and the training stops. Any pain, any feeling sick and training is over. Curtis said, giving in to her demands and switching off the stove. He turned and walked to the door, following Eve. Can we still shift and go for a run later? Eve hesitantly questioned as she slowed. And Curtis walked past her. Yeah. I suppose it would be good for both of us. Curtis replied. Eve made her way over to stand in front of the tree. Not today. Something different. I know you do not want to take it easy. Trust me, we won't. Curtis interrupted her and motioned for her to stand in front of him. Hit me, he said. What? Eve scrunched up her face at him. You heard me, Curtis said with a serious tone. After hesitating momentarily, Eve threw a hard punch towards Curtis's torso. It was strong and fast, just like every other punch she had thrown at the tree over the last few weeks. It was a punch that would have undoubtedly shook the tree. Curtis stepped forward and to the side, catching Eve's fist under his arm, utilizing her momentum. Curtis stepped back, pulling Eve forward along with him, effectively disrupting her balance. He released her and stepped back again. Curtis stood unshaken, ready for the next attack. Again, he said, waiting for Eve to make a move. What are we doing? Why are we doing this? Eve questioned Curtis as she moved backward, and moving her feet to the position Curtis had first showed her the day that he started training her. Fighting. This is what you have been building your strength for, is it not? So you are able to defend yourself. Now throw a punch, Curtis said. Eve nodded curtly and proceeded to throw another punch. Careful not to step into the same trap. This continued for the next hour. Eve attacking but never able to land a punch. She never repeated the same mistake. But Curtis seemed to be able to see every flaw in her movements. And there sure was a lot of flaws. All right, that is enough for today, Curtis said as Eve lay on the ground trying to force more air into her lungs. Come inside and eat breakfast now. I have a few things to do, and then this afternoon we will go for that run, Curtis said, moving back to the cabin. With a groan, Eve managed to get to her feet and follow Curtis inside. She collapsed on one of the chairs at the dining table. She bent forward and rested her head on the table, turning to watch as Curtis divided up their breakfasts. She pushed herself up onto her elbows as Curtis placed a bowl in front of her. She was pleasantly surprised to see slices of banana sitting on top of the porridge. It was a nice change to have some freshness added to her diet. I bought a few things for you when we went out. A couple of books. A jacket. It is going to get cold up here quickly. A sketch pad with some pencils. A few other things, this and that, you know. You ought to entertain yourself with some of it today before we leave, Curtis said, gesturing to 2 green plastic bags that sat at the entrance to the hallway. Really? Eve's eye shot up to Curtis's face as her mouth was half filled with food. Yep. Curtis nodded, trying not to laugh at the goofy expression of Eve's food-covered face. Thank you. I mean, really, thank you so much. You have done so much for me already. You didn't have to, Eve said, trying to convey her sincerity as much as she could. I figured you would start to get bored during the day soon. Didn't want you to start bothering me outside of training, Curtis said, trying to brush off her appreciation. He quickly packed up their dishes and moved out of the kitchen and down the hallway, effectively retreating to his office. Eve stood after a few moments and walked to the green bags cautiously. She picked them up and moved them over to the table. Carefully, she took out each item. On top, there was a puffy jacket with a big hood that was a muted green color. Slipping it on, she zipped it up. It fit perfectly. Slipping it off and folding it up, she turned to see what else sat in the bags. As Curtis had said, there was a few books piled on top of each other, including a cooking book absolutely packed with recipes. She would enjoy reading them and trying out some new recipes. However, she wasn't sure what Curtis was trying to say about her cooking. She at least thought she was a half-decent chef, considering all of the time she had spent in the pack kitchens with Joanne. Maybe she had been wrong. Also in the bag was a bundle of stretchy headbands, Those would definitely be useful when training. Curtis must have noticed how she had been trying out an array of different hairstyles, trying to find the best one to keep her hair out of her eyes. There were a few pairs of new socks, including some fluffy ones with grippy bottoms. After pulling out some new soap and candles, Eve finally pulled out the sketch pad that Curtis had described to her. The pages were thick, smooth, and high quality, sitting at the bottom of the bag. A silver case remained. Within the case there was an array of sketching pencils covering the whole spectrum of colors. Sitting down, she began to draw a rough outline of what the picture would eventually become. Eve had always loved to sketch and paint, following in her mum's footsteps. Some of her fondest memories had been drawing and painting with her mum as a small child. She sat for hours, drawing until the image started to form more clearly on the page as she added shading and the colors began to blend together smoothly. She became so engrossed in the page, only coming out of her concentration when Curtis walked down the hallway and came to look over her shoulder. "Wow. If I had known you were such a good artist, I would have got you some more supplies, some better ones too," Curtis said as he looked down appreciatively at the sketch pad. On the page, a woman and child were dancing in the sunlight, surrounded by a field of wildflowers. Both of their faces were filled with joy and delight, fully engrossed in each other's company. No, you have given me more than I could ever hope for." Eve shook her head, closed the sketch pad, and got up to begin making herself and Curtis lunch. Curtis sat at the table, watching as she busied herself around the kitchen. Quietly, the two ate their lunch before cleaning up the dishes. Eve and Curtis then made their way outside. Eve steadied herself as she stepped down onto the ground. Taking a deep breath, she prepared to shift. Eve felt the familiar uncomfortable, but not painful, feeling of her bones and organs rearranging inside of her as strands of thick fur began to sprout out from her skin. She fell forward onto her hands that were halfway to becoming paws. As she completed, Eve was able to open her eyes and look forward at Curtis, who stood in front of her, in his wolf form. Curtis was taller than Eve. He was covered in a mottled gray and brown fur that hung low around his belly. His eyes were the same gray-green as in his human form. At the same time, Curtis was admiring Eve in her wolf form. She possessed the same chocolate-brown-colored fur as her hair was colored when human. Across her cheek there was 3 distinct lines of pink where her scars showed through her thick fur. With a nod, Curtis turned and trotted over to the tree line. Eve followed behind him as he took a path that she was unfamiliar with. Steadily, they increased their pace until the ground churned away beneath them. Trees started to whip past, becoming a blur of green and brown streaks. Eve sped her legs up, trying to overtake Curtis as a wolfy grin spread across her face. Curtis did a double take before realizing what she was attempting to do. He, too, had a grin spread across his face as he sped up to match her increasing pace. Soon the pair diverted off of their path as they bumped into each other, attempting to throw the other off balance. Eve fell behind slightly as she stumbled when Curtis's larger form shoulder bumped her. Soon the playful pair broke through the trees and slowed to a stop next to a wide lake. Eve suspected it was the same lake that she saw each morning on her run from the very top of the mountain. Up close, it was as beautiful as she had suspected that it would be. Tall clumps of grass swayed softly in the breeze surrounding the lake. The surface had a few ripples moving across it. Eve lowered herself to the ground, shifting slightly so that she got off of a rock that was poking into her soft belly. Curtis followed her lead and laid down next to Eve's smaller body. She leaned into him ever so slightly, drawn to his warmth. Together they watched out over the lake, taking in the scenery. Eve decided that when she had the time, she would bring one the books Curtis had given her and read it at the lake. She imagined that it would soothe her soul. Just a quiet, relaxing day by herself. As Eve became consumed by the view in front of her, Curtis nudged her shoulder to get her attention. She turned to look up at him while still keeping her head resting on the ground. Curtis jumped up and crouched down with his rear sticking up towards the sky. His tail flicked side to side, signaling to her that he wanted to play. In response, she rolled away and jumped up to her feet. Eve flicked her tail back, teasing Curtis back. He jumped up onto his back paws. Eve darted forward and ran around Curtis in circles. Curtis jumped back to get Eve in his line of sight. The two wolves continued to run around each other until Curtis leapt forward, surprising Eve, managing to pin her underneath him. Eve curled her legs up into her body as Curtis crouched down, allowing his body to press down onto Eve. She thought he felt like a giant weighted blanket. Gently. Curtis pushed his head forward and sneakily licked Eve's nose. Eve blinked up at him, shocked by his actions. Such a blatant display of affection would have caused her cheeks to turn red had she not been in her wolf form. Hesitating, she stretched up and quickly licked Curtis's furry cheek in response. After a few seconds, Curtis stood up, allowing Eve to get to her feet. Together, they turned and started trotting back in the direction of the cabin at a slow and leisurely pace. They ran side by side, so close that their fur brushed up against each other. Eve could not help but notice the warmness she felt in her chest. It was the opposite to the feeling that engulfed her when the mate bond pulled at her. Before long, the pair arrived back at the cabin just moments before the sun slipped below the horizon and it got hazy. Curtis gave Eve a little nudge before he walked over to the tree where he had left his clothes. Following his lead, Eve moved to where she had left her clothes. Quickly, she willed her body to transform and then slipped on her clothes as the cold instantly seeped into her bones now that she was not protected by her thick coat of fur. Once inside, Curtis began to heat up dinner, soup that had been left over from the previous night. Eve did not really taste it as she ate. She was tired, and her thoughts wandered to the events of the day. Before long, she washed the dishes as Curtis dried them and put them away. The process had been well rehearsed over the last few weeks, and Eve was beginning to feel very domesticated at moments like this. Finishing up, Eve made her way to her room. She was keen to have a warm shower to loosen her aching muscles before going to bed. Just as she stepped through the threshold, Curtis interrupted her. "Good night, Eve," he said softly with a small wave before padding softly down towards his own room. "Good night, Curtis," Eve whispered back before clicking her door shut. She stood with her back leaning against the closed door for a moment before going about her nightly routine. As she laid down and pulled the thick blanket up over herself, Eve's mind began to wander and fall down a rambling tunnel of thoughts. Had she been imagining the warm feelings in her chest when Curtis had shown her affection? Was that even affection? And if it was, how was she meant to interpret it? Was she misinterpreting signals? Was she simply feeling this way because of the amount of time that she had spent with Curtis clouding her emotions? Or perhaps she had simply been treated so poorly by her mate that any kindness shown to her by Curtis made her feel special when she was not. Not that any of those questions mattered, no matter the answers that she undoubtedly would never receive. This was because of one simple fact that overpowered every emotion, feeling or thought that Eve would ever have about Curtis. Out there, in the world somewhere, Curtis had a mate. And there was absolutely no way that Eve would ever think to come between Curtis and whoever his mate was. Saddened but solid on her conviction, Eve slipped into a quiet and peaceful sleep. Eve stood in front of the full-length mirror that she had just hung up the other day on the back of the door. It had been around 4 months since she started training with Curtis, and she was definitely able to notice the changes in her body. Her shoulders were wider and there was a slight definition to her arms. Her thighs had become wider, and she would need to get some new pants soon. Her current ones were getting a bit too tight for her liking. The scars on her face had finally turned white and were no longer as ridged as they had been. She liked the changes she saw in the mirror, not just the physical but the small smile that sat on her face. She was proud of what she had achieved, proud of her commitment to herself. The pain from her mate bond had lessened greatly since the time she had left Emerald Eye. No doubt. She still woke up some nights with a burning pain in her chest, but now it was a smolder than an all-engulfing fire. After her feelings had started to bloom a few months ago, she had made the decision to try to stop her feelings for Curtis from developing. This included mostly isolating herself throughout the day when she was not training. It had been difficult, but she filled her time with painting, drawing, reading, and exploring around the woods. Curtis had noticed her withdrawal, however. He did not realize why it was happening. He simply assumed that the reality of losing her family, pack and mate was weighing heavy on Eve's mind. He did not want to pressure her into discussing it. She had suffered a lot, and he assumed that she would need time to herself to heal. So, he had kept his distance, wondering if he had just pushed her too far the day. They had gone for a run to the lake together. Eve was grateful that Curtis let her be, although the day prior he had invited her to go to pick up supplies with him. She had been hesitant at first, but the allure of using the payphone was too great for her to ignore. So, she had journeyed down the mountain and sat in the car next to Curtis as they headed into the human town. The silent and awkward ride there and back had been worth it, though, being able to hear her mum's voice. She remembered every word of their phone call. "Hello." Marie answered the phone. "Mum, how are you?" Eve said into the phone. "Oh, pumpkin. I'm so glad to hear from you." "I'm fine. I'm doing good." "How are you? Is everything okay?" Marie said, trying to not let her daughter hear the lie in her voice. "I'm doing okay, Mum. I really miss you and Joanne." Eve said with a sad smile. "I miss you too, baby." Marie said, "I was thinking that maybe I would be able to come and see you soon. Or maybe you could go to Alpha Ian's pack. And I could meet you there. I really, really want to see and give you a hug." Eve said, desperate to have her mum agree. "Oh, baby. I really wish I could hold you in my arms. But it's not safe, and I have been forbidden from leaving the pack grounds. I don't want you to come here yet, at least not until Alpha Darren steps down and Blake takes up his place. I thought he would have taken over by now. But the ceremony has been scheduled for 6 weeks from now. Maybe we can talk about it then," Marie said, trying to let her daughter down gently. "It's okay. I understand. I know that we will be able to see each other soon enough. But it doesn't mean that I'm not impatient," Eve said, trying to sound cheerful, but a tear rolled down her cheek. After that, they had talked about trivial things, things that had no importance and did not reveal the pain they were both feeling at their separation. They discussed how Joanne was doing and her latest creation in the kitchen. They discussed how Marie's painting was progressing, Eve adding in that she too had been making art again. Eve's reminiscing was cut short by a short rap on her door. Moving over. She swung open the door. On the other side was Curtis. Eve was shocked by the sudden closeness of him and took a step backwards. Hey," Curtis said, scratching the back of his head. "Hey. Did you need something?" Eve replied. "Yeah. I needed to talk to you about something." Curtis trailed off, seemingly lost in thought. "Okay. What?" Eve said, trying to coax him into keep talking. "I got a letter yesterday when we went into town. From my father, actually. He wants to meet up with me soon," Curtis said with a shrug. "Oh, okay. So, I'll stay here until you get back then," Eve questioned him. No. Actually, you should come with me. It will be safer if you come with me," Curtis said. "All right, I suppose." "When are we leaving then?" Eve reluctantly agreed. "We will leave in 2 days. We will have to drive 2 days north, and then we will have to go the rest of the way on foot, maybe another day or two depending on how fast we move and the weather," Curtis said with a shrug. All right then. I suppose I wouldn't mind a change in scenery," Eve conceded. With a nod, Curtis turned to leave Eve to her solitude. Eve had to wake earlier than usual the morning that they left. The walk down the mountain had woken her up, though, as the frigid air infiltrated her lungs. She was glad to jump inside the car and crank up the heater and rub her hands together, trying to get rid of the numbness that had engulfed them. As the tires turned over and the outside world flew past rapidly, Eve curled her legs up onto the seat underneath herself. "You haven't really asked me any questions." Curtis's voice filled the air. "Questions about what?" Eve said, turning her head from the passenger window to face him as he drove down the road. "Questions about why my father wants to see me. Questions about who I am and why I live up on that mountain without a pack," Curtis said, glancing over to Eve, who was trying to keep her face free of any emotions, despite the fact that she was surprised by this conversation. "Would you answer me if I had asked you?" she replied. "Not at first, I suppose, but now. I think it is more than fair that you know a little about me, considering everything that I know about you. Plus, I trust you, mostly," Curtis said, keeping his eyes forward. "Mostly. Well then, why are we going to see your dad?" Eve said, giving in. "Well, if I had to guess, I would say that he probably wants me to take over his position," Curtis said. "Position care to be a little more descriptive," Eve said with a small smile. "That's fair. He has a seat on the council. It has been passed through our family for a few generations." Curtis replied, "Council, as in the governing council, leaders of the whole werewolf community, that council. You mean?" Eve sat up in shock. "Yeah, that's the one," Dad has been pestering me for a few years to take over, but I have never been ready, I suppose. Curtis said with a quick glance over to Eve, trying to judge her reaction. Right then. That is going to take a moment for me to wrap my head around. So why do you live up there all by yourself? I have struggled even having your company. It is like my soul is calling out for a pack. How can you feel that and continue to stay isolated for such a long time? Eve questioned him. When the moon goddess decided to make the council, she feared that individuals would take advantage of their position and power to benefit some packs over others. But she wanted equality. So, she fundamentally changed the wolf of every individual who was or ever would be on the council. Changed them so that they were less dependent and less loyal to their pack. Curtis said. What does that mean for you? Do you wish it wasn't like that? Eve said curiously. Well, it means I live up in the mountains by myself. At least until you came along. When I become a council member, it will be expected that I integrate myself back into society a bit, I suppose. I'll do what every council member does, I'd reckon. Live in a pack territory, not in the pack really, though, and then move on after a couple of years. Do that until I can pass off the title and I can go back to the mountains. I don't think it really matters what I want, because that is how my life will go. Curtis said with a slight shrug. That sounds lonely to me. How would you have a family? Eve wondered aloud. Not really meaning to let the words come out. I guess that's why most people who are council members don't tend to stay with their mates. Too hard. The isolation, that is. Curtis said with a shrug. Eve couldn't help but let the shock show on her face. Yeah. It isn't a thing most people like to talk about. I guess. Everyone seems to have that kind of reaction. Curtis said. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to. Eve said. It's all right. Don't worry about it. It's not like council members don't lead fulfilling lives and such. My dad, for example. He met his mate. It didn't work out. Then he met my mum. Had a couple of kids, including myself. And have been together for 27 years. I think he has done pretty good for himself, all things considered, Curtis said. Wow. It just didn't work out, huh? Eve said. Well, I'm sure it was a little more complicated than that. Not a thing you would want to discuss too often, though, I suppose. Curtis said once again, glancing at Eve's curled-up form. Why are you telling me this? Eve said, quirking her eyebrow up. Maybe to prepare for meeting my parents when we arrive. Maybe to let you know that even though it did not work out with your mate, it doesn't mean your chances at finding love are not zero. Who knows? Curtis said with a shrug. Thank you, then. Eve said genuinely. You look tired. You should have a sleep. We have a long few days ahead of us, and you will need to be well rested. Curtis said, effectively ending the conversation. Eve only having more questions now than she did before. Did Curtis think that him and his mate would follow the same path as his dad, in fact? She actually had no idea what Curtis thought about having a mate. Not that it was any of her business, Eve reminded herself. All right. Wake me up when we get to wherever, I suppose, Eve said before closing her eyes. By the end of the second day of traveling, Eve was itching to stretch out her legs to rid herself from the cramps overtaking her calves and thighs. She was not sure that she would be able to cope with any more time cooped up. Driving down the same monotonous highways. Had they had to spend another moment driving? Eve suspected that she would have ripped out huge chunks of her hair. As soon as Curtis pulled over, Eve jumped out of the door and felt the breeze as it tickled her face. We will camp tonight and head off in the morning. With any luck, we will arrive by mid-afternoon, Curtis said as he hopped out of the driver's side door. Arrive where exactly? Eve asked, curious about their destination. I suppose I didn't really say, did I? Currently, my mum and dad are living on the outskirts of the Silver Hill Pack. Got a nice little house there, Curtis informed her, surprising Eve. From the look on your face, I can see that you have heard of them, Curtis said with a little laugh. Yeah. They say that the pack is directly descended from the old royals. That's about all I know, Eve said as she stretched her arms up to the sky, causing her vertebrae to pop. Yeah. Not far off. Be prepared, we will have to visit the Alpha and Luna to show our respects. They are not real keen on letting strangers wander around, I suspect, Curtis informed her. Oh. You haven't met them before then? Eve asked him. Very briefly when I was basically a kid, Curtis said as he began to unload their bags. Together they gathered up their things and moved into the cover of the trees. After about half an hour, Curtis announced that they had gone far enough and that they would stop for now. Eve began to set up a small campfire whilst Curtis slipped off into the trees in search of some small prey for their dinner. By the time Curtis returned with a rabbit hanging at his side, quickly and efficiently, Curtis skinned and gutted the animal before putting it on a spit over the fire. Eve's stomach grumbled at the sight of the rabbit browning and becoming crispy over the fire. The scent invaded her nostrils, and she reached forward, ready to remove it from its cooking position. Well, that seems mighty fine, doesn't it, boys? A voice said from behind Eve. Jumping up, Eve turned to see a group of 6 men step out of the shadows of the trees. Definitely rogues, Eve thought as she observed their dirty appearances. Y'all wouldn't mind if we joined for some dinner? Yeah, see, we have been traveling a long way and we are sure hungry. The leader of the group stepped forward closer to the light of the fire. Now that his face was illuminated by the flickering fire, Eve could make out the rotting teeth in his mouth. Curtis stood up slowly and moved up behind Eve's back, giving her reassurance and slight comfort. The rest of the rogues slowly fanned out, half encircling the pair. Unfortunately, fellas, I did not realize we would have company. So we only have the one rabbit. I'm not sure that we would be able to split that between all of us. Do you? Curtis said as he placed his hand on Eve's back. On the contrary, I think there is enough for us. It smells very tasty, the leader said, stepping forward as the other rogues fanned out further and fully encircled the pair. And you, little girl, you look mighty tasty as well, despite those scars you got there, the rogue leader said. You can take the rabbit and move on. We don't want any trouble, Curtis said, pulling Eve closer. Oh dear. You see, me and my friends here, we don't mind a bit of trouble, the rogue said as the circle tightened closer. Eve and Curtis glanced at each other, ready for the confrontation that was about to be unleashed. Curtis gave her a small smile and a nod. She was ready. She had trained hard the last few months to be able to protect herself. Eve gave Curtis a quick nod in return, except her face was grim. Eve leapt to her right, aiming to have the advantage of surprise. And she did. As she tackled the rogue to the ground, she felt his head crack against a rock on the ground. She knew instantly that he would not be getting back up. As she jumped up, she saw that Curtis had acted similarly to her. Now they were only outnumbered 1 to 2 at least. Well, looks like we got some fighters on our hands, boys. Now you listen here. I was gonna go easy on you two. Not anymore. I don't think, me and ma boys. We're gonna kill you, boy. And then we are gonna handle you roughly, little girl, until you're all bruised and bloody. Then I'll kill ya. Or, perhaps, we should make you watch, boy. Yeah, I like that better. That's what we are gonna do, the rogue said, turning to Curtis with an evil grin on his face. Curtis leaped forward towards the leader, but one of his companions jumped in the way. Eve turned away to face the other rogues. She was confident that Curtis would be able to handle those two. So she turned to face the remaining rogues as they stalked towards her. They both gave her a sickening grin before launching at her. Ducking to the side, she ran towards the fire where Curtis had left the knife used to skin the rabbit sitting on the ground. She crouched down, prepared for the attack coming her way. They snarled and ran forward again. Eve kicked one of them on the side of their knee. He crumpled a little, allowing her to plunge the knife into his shoulder. He screamed out in pain as she ripped it out to face the other attacker, causing blood to spurt forth. He would die in a few minutes, judging from the level of blood loss Eve guessed. Out of the corner of her eye, she could see Curtis had managed to snap the neck of one of his opponents, and he was now fighting their chatty leader. The rogue facing her seemed even more angered by the death of his comrade. Come here, little girl, he growled out at her. He threw a wild, swinging punch at Eve, just clipping the side of her head as she ducked down. Her vision blurred slightly as she threw solid punches into his side. She jumped around to the side, bringing her knee up to strike around where his kidney floated. The rogue crouched over in pain as Eve jumped back out of his reach. Baring his teeth, he launched forward again. But it was clear that he was not used to having to fight one-on-one. The rogues probably always outnumbered their foe and did not have any need for fighting skills. Darting forward and back, she managed to swing the knife forward and slice open his arm a few times. Fueled by rage, the rogue leaped forward again, somehow managing to catch her off guard. wrapping one hand around her neck. He pinned her against a tree. Before she had the chance to recover from her shock, he used his other hand to pin her hand holding the knife. She was quickly running out of air, desperately. She brought her free hand up to his face. With all the strength she had left, she sunk her thumb into his eye socket. Feeling it squish away, he let out a horrific cry as he stumbled back, bringing his hands to his mutilated eye. With minimal hesitation, she stepped forward and cut his throat. He died within seconds. Eve turned to watch as Curtis pushed his clawed hand into the chest of the rogue leader. He ripped his hand back, leaving behind a cavity, dropping the body to the ground. Curtis turned to face Eve. Tears filled her eyes as she realized that she had just taken the life of 3 people, evil though they may have been. Rushing forward, Curtis pulled her into his arms, gripping her tight. He tried not get blood onto her. "Are you okay? Are you hurt anywhere?" Curtis said, stepping back and holding her in front of him. I don't think so." Eve managed to stutter out, gently. Curtis traced the back of his hand down her neck that was already turning yellow and purple. No doubt tomorrow her throat would be painted with an array of other colors. Curtis pulled her back into a softer hug, rubbing his hands up and down her back as she silently cried. "Come on. I don't think that either of us will be able to sleep tonight. We will head towards the pack territory now. Is that okay with you?" Curtis said with Eve still tucked into his chest. She only nodded in reply. They would stay clutching each other for another half an hour before they separated and left the camp and the dead rogues behind. Eve was still huddled close to Curtis's side as they reached the boundary of the Silver Hill lands. Every noise she heard on the way had made her jump out of her skin. They came to a slow stop and waited for the border patrol to recognize their presence. "Weren't expecting you until late this afternoon, Curtis." A voice rung out. A moment later, the owner of said voice stepped forward into view. She was lean and muscular, her face holding a slight smirk. "Ah well. Plans change. Had a run-in with a group of rouges. Thought it best if we kept on the move until we were a little safer." Curtis shrugged in reply. He seemed to recognize the woman who had greeted them. Bastards. There has been a group of rouge wreaking havoc just outside of the territory for months. Haven't had any success catching them, though. The woman replied. "Well, you won't have to deal with them anymore," Curtis said with Eve still tucked just behind him. "What? You dealt with all 6 of them yourself?" The women seemed incredulous. "No, of course not. I took care of 3 of them. Eve here finished of the others," Curtis said. He stepped to the side slightly, meaning he was no longer masking Eve's presence. Who would have thought it? Well, come on. I will inform the Alpha of your presence on the way. I'm sure he will want to meet with you sooner rather than later." The woman turned and disappeared into the trees again. Eve glanced up Curtis as he gave her a reassuring nod. He put his hand on her back and gently propelled her forward and over the boundary. Nerves filled her at the realization this was the first time in months she had been on packland. After following the woman for 15 minutes, they broke through the tree line and Eve was able to appreciate the size of the pack. It had to be at least double to the size of Emerald Eye, judging from the size of the buildings and the number of people milling around. The woman headed directly to the structure in the center of the township. She stopped at the front door and waited for Eve and Curtis to catch up to her. "Go inside and up the stairs. Knock on the last door on the right at the very end of the hallway," she stated, before turning and leaving the pair alone. "In we go, I suppose," Curtis said as he pulled the door open and gestured for Eve to go in front of him. Together they followed the directions they were given until they stood in front of a dark wooden door. Curtis raised his fist and knocked. After a moment, a voice inside called them in. "Ah, Curtis. So good to see you. It's been a while." A figure greeted them as they stepped through the doorway. "Alpha Sean. Always good to see you," Curtis said as he stepped forward to shake the man's outstretched hand. "And who is this?" Alpha Sean questioned as he noticed Eve in the room. "A good friend of mine who has been staying with me a while. Eve, this is Alpha Sean. I hope it is not an issue that she has come with me," Curtis said. However, Eve got the impression he would not care if her presence was an issue. "Nice to meet you, Eve. What was your last name, if you do not mind me asking? You must understand I like to know who is within my pack at all times." Alpha Sean questioned her. "It does not matter. I will personally vouch for Eve. You must understand it is better that way. Curtis immediately replied, not allowing Eve the chance to even think how she would answer the Alpha's questions as to her identity. Right. I suppose you would be willing to face punishment should she end up posing a threat to my pack then. Curtis. Sean raised an eyebrow, intrigued by the pair standing before him. Yes. Is that all? We have had a long night traveling. I would like to see my parents and rest. Curtis said, effectively cutting the interrogation short. Of course. Of course. I believe your father is waiting downstairs for you. I will talk with you more later. Alpha Sean waved his hand, dismissing them, swiftly. Curtis turned and exited the office with Eve moving quickly to keep up with him. She was still trying to process the conversation she had just witnessed. It was clear that the Alpha was suspicious of her. Although she could not understand why Curtis had put himself in harm's way to protect her identity. These questions rattled around her head without answers as they descended back down to the first floor. Curtis, my boy. I'm so glad that you are here. A booming voice startled Eve. She looked up to spot a large frame standing to the side of the front door. He looked remarkably similar to Curtis, with the same green eyes and facial structure. However, his hair was a salted gray that would have likely been a straight chocolate brown 10 years ago. The father and son embraced in a firm hug as Eve stood back shyly. Dad, it's so good to see you, Curtis said, smiling as he pulled away from the embrace. This is Eve, a friend of mine, Curtis said, gesturing to her. Nice to meet you, Eve. I'm Kirk. The older man stepped forward and gave a warm embrace of greeting. Hi. It's nice to meet you, Eve said, shocked by the embrace but already comfortable around Kirk. All righty, you two. Come on. Your mum is waiting for you at home. I have to warn you. She is all over the place this morning. She was planning to do most of her cooking today so she could stuff you full of food this afternoon. Then she hears you're early and you brought someone with you. Kirk smiled as he described his wife's antics. Great. Can't wait, Curtis said sarcastically as the three headed outside and away from the main group of buildings. Curtis and his dad chatted as they walked, allowing Eve to take stock of their surroundings properly. The terrain was flatter than Eve had grown accustomed to. It seemed as though the forest they had traveled through came to an end just near the main settlement, effectively separating the pack from the outside world. The grass was worn down into a rough path that they followed but was around knee-high to either side. It was clear that not many people regularly traversed the makeshift pathway. Soon, they arrived at a white cottage with the main settlement seemingly small in the distance. Eve followed Kirk and Curtis as they entered the home. Instantly, she was engulfed with an array of smells, from cookies sitting on the kitchen bench cooling to a large roast sitting in the oven. Ah, my son has finally returned home to see his mother. I thought the day would never come and you had stopped loving me. The tall woman in the kitchen proclaimed loudly with her hand on her chest. Mum, Curtis groaned out, appearing embarrassed by his mum's actions. Don't give me that. Come here and give me a kiss, boy. The woman scolded him as she pulled him in for a kiss on the cheek. And who do we have here? She turned and advanced forward on Eve. Hi. I'm Eve, was the reply that she received. Hi, darlin'. I'm Maya, this loaf's mum. I'm delighted to have a gorgeous young thing come to visit. I'm sick of being overrun by these beasts, Maya proclaimed as she held Eve's cheeks to inspect her. Eve doubted that anyone could ever overrun Maya despite what she might say. Well, thank you for letting me stay. I know you weren't exactly expecting another guest, but I appreciate it, Eve said as she smiled, unable to not be affected by Maya's happiness. Nonsense, darl. I can already tell we are going to get along like a house on fire. Come. Let us get you some food and then you can tell me all about yourself. And I'll tell you about Curtis when he was a wee little bub. Maya chuckled mischievously as she pulled Eve to the island bench in the kitchen. Mum, it's been a long night. I'm starving and then I need to go for a long sleep, and I'm sure Eve feels that same way. Maybe you can gossip later, Curtis said, interrupting his mum's plans much to Eve's relief. Oh my gosh, darlin'. How rude of me. Of course. You would be exhausted. Let me get you a plate and then set up a room for you. Would you be wanting a shower as well? Maya looked startled by her own actions and began to pile a variety of food onto 2 plates. A shower sounds amazing, Eve said with a soft smile as the plate was pushed in front of her. No problem. I'll sort that out while you eat, Maya said before disappearing into another room. Eve had slept solidly through that whole day and night, just shy of 20 hours. She had only woken as Curtis knocked on her door the next morning, telling her to get up and get ready to do some training. With a groan, she had managed to pull on some clothes and meet him outside. Thankfully, they had skipped the run, with Curtis being cautious about moving around the unknown territory too much to compensate. Curtis seemed to be holding back less than he had previously, laying on the ground once again. Eve huffed out in annoyance, realizing how much she still had to learn. Come on, get up, Curtis said as he circled around her. Why are you being so tough today? Eve groaned out as she clambered to her feet. You proved yourself the other day with the rouges. You showed me that you are ready to step up your combat training, so next time you are able to take all 6 rouges if they attack, Curtis said. Really? Eve grinned, energized by his praise, filled with enthusiasm. Eve tried to distract Curtis and sweep his feet from beneath him. She failed miserably and was once again in the dirt. Come on, you two. Breakfast is ready, Maya called out from the kitchen window where she had been watching them. She was impressed at the strength of the young girl. Not many people would keep getting back up after being beaten so decisively. Curtis extends his hand to help Eve up and out of the dirt. The pair made their way inside to where Maya had put piles of food out on the dining table. There was bowls filled with eggs cooked all different ways, piles of toast already buttered, stacks of fried bacon, a ridiculous amount of pancakes with accompanying toppings, and so much more. Eve's eyes widened at the sight, whilst Curtis just shook his head, having already expected the enormous spread. We need to get a little more meat on your bones, Eve. Plus, I'm sure you're starving after all of that training, Maya said as she pushed Eve into a chair and started putting food on her plate. Thanks, Eve mumbled as Kirk and Curtis sat down across from her. Just eat what you want, love. Ignore my wife, Kirk said as he reached for the bacon. But Maya slapped his hand away. She proceeded to fill his plate up and put it back in front of her husband. Kirk knew better than to argue with his wife and happily dug into breakfast. I don't know if Alpha Sean mentioned the ball that they are hosting tonight to you guys, Kirk spoke between mouthfuls of food, earning him disapproving looks from Maya. The other 3 packs from the north are expected to attend with the hope that some mates can meet. Sean suggested it would be a good opportunity for you to get to know some alphas, Curtis. And I'm inclined to agree. You should be building some relationships now so that it is easier for you down the track when you take over, Kirk said, earning groans from Curtis. Oh, Eve, you'll have to come as well. It's so much fun watching everyone dress up and look so beautiful, Maya clapped with excitement. I don't know. I haven't got anything fancy enough to wear to something like that. I think it might be best if I just stay here, Eve said, shaking her head. Nonsense. I'm sure I'll have something for you to wear. We go to way too many of these things, with Kirk being on the council and all. I'm positive that I'll have something you can wear, Maya said as she began planning Eve's look in her head. Curtis simply gave Eve a shrug and kept eating his breakfast. He would face down many foes, but he knew that he would never convince his mother if she already had her mind set to something. Best to just go along with what she wanted. Finishing up breakfast, Maya practically pushed Eve to the bathroom, stating, the sooner you clean up, the sooner we can find the perfect dress for you. Plus, I'll need some time to alter it, so it fits you perfectly. Having cleaned away all of the dirt and grime from being thrown on the ground multiple times that morning, Eve finally stepped out of the bathroom to find Maya waiting for her. Together, they headed to the master bedroom where Maya had her own walk-in wardrobe. She had not been exaggerating about the number of gowns she owned. If anything, the collection of dresses was even greater than Eve had been anticipating. There was every color and every fabric, all in varying lengths, some with sleeves and some backless. Eve could not help but drop her jaw at the sight. All right. I have a few ideas of what might look good on you, Darl. So I'll pull some out. If you see anything you like, just grab it, Maya said as started to look for particular dresses. Eve slowly worked her way down the rack of gowns as Maya looked down the other rack. She admired the large collection and pulled out 2 modest-looking dresses. One, a tea-length purple number with full sleeves, and the other a floor-length A-line dress, a dark blue. Eve turned to see that Maya had a least 8 dress piled up in her arms. Okay then. That seems like enough for now. We might have to come back. But we will start with these, Maya said as they exited the wardrobe. Start with the ones you have there. Eve, Maya suggested, pointing her towards the bathroom. Maya patiently waited as Eve tried one each dress, which Eve either felt uncomfortable in or Maya insisted was not right. Soon, all of the dresses they had picked out had been eliminated, leaving Eve feeling deflated. Hold on just a moment, darlin'. I think I have something that might just be perfect for you hidden away somewhere, Maya said as she retreated back into the mass of dresses. Eve waited curiously, listening as Maya let out a string of curses and mumbling in search of a specific dress. After a few moments, she emerged holding a large white box. I have had this forever and could never find the right time to wear it. I think perhaps you are the person who can do it the most justice, Maya said as she placed the box on the bed next to Eve. Hesitating, Eve removed the lid of the slightly dusty box. Inside lay a silky sage green gown. The color made her heart skip a beat. Go on then, try it on, Maya said as picked up the dress and pushed Eve gently back towards the bathroom. Maya gasped as Eve stepped back out wearing the dress. The straight neckline was flattering but not too revealing that it made Eve uncomfortable, whilst the low cowl back and spaghetti straps made Maya grin. It hugged Eve tightly until it loosened off just above the knee so that it fell nicely to the ground, pooling around Eve's feet. Oh my, you look stunning, Maya said with tears filling her eyes. This dress is so amazing. Are you sure that I can wear it? Eve said, feeling conflicted. Yes, absolutely. I'm going to have to take up the hem, so you don't trip over yourself, but aside from that it looks like it was made for you, Maya gushed as she tried to look at Eve from every angle possible. Thank you for everything you have done for me, Eve said, overcome with emotion. My pleasure, honey, Maya said as they embraced. Eve had sat patiently for the last hour as Maya fussed around her, making sure her hair and light makeup were absolutely perfect. Finally, Maya announced that she was done, gazing at herself in the mirror. Eve was surprised at how Maya had chosen to frame her face, mainly focusing on accentuating her eyelashes and lips. Her hair was softly pulled up into 2 French braids that were tucked in the back, scattered throughout. Maya had placed delicate pearl clips that stood out against her brown hair. So, what do you think? Maya asked her as she stepped into the background of the mirror. Hands clasped together. Wow. I look. You have done an amazing job. I can't. Just wow, Eve managed to say. Well, you are a beautiful canvas, darlin'. I just put a little sparkle on, Maya gushed. Come now. I can practically feel Kirk's anxiety at being late from here. He never wants to tell me to hurry, 'cause ya know beauty takes time, but he hates to be late. Maya giggled, pushing Eve to the door and down the hallway. Kirk and Curtis stood waiting by the front door for the 2 women. My love, you look stunning, Kirk exclaimed as he took in Maya's appearance. She was wearing a black off-the-shoulder dress with full-length sleeves. Oh. Stop that. Come on, let's go, Maya said, giving Kirk a light slap and heading out the front door. After a short moment of silence, Curtis and Eve followed the pair, walking in the direction of the main cluster of buildings. Curtis broke the silence of the crisp night air. That dress really suits you. I think you look lovely, he managed to say after clearing his throat. Thanks. You look nice as well, Eve said. A light blush spread out over her cheeks after noting that Curtis did indeed look quite nice. He was wearing a navy suit jacket over a white button-down shirt with a tan pair of trousers. Arriving at the hall, Eve admired the atmosphere. The ceiling had large, flowy sheets hanging down, and the walls were covered in a variety of flowers, balloons and streamers. Emerald Eye had never even come close to hosting such an impressive event. Maya handed Eve a flute of champagne just as a tapping came over the microphone. Good evening, everybody. I am so glad to see you all. Alpha Sean's booming voice rang out. I'd like to thank our wonderful house and kitchen staff for putting together this shindig. They have done a fantastic job. Next, a warm welcome goes out to our visitors from our neighbors, Gold Claw, Cliff's Peak, and Blind Eye. Please enjoy the booze. The food. And the company, who knows. There might be a few mates out there who find each other. Alpha Sean finished off with a wink. He handed off the microphone and noise quickly filled the hall. You ladies mingle while Curtis and I go say hello to Councilmember Dale. He has been staying with Blind Eye for the last few months. I want to check and see how he is going. Kirk said to Eve and Maya before walking into the mass of people. Oh, Eve, look over there. How sweet. Mates meeting for the first time. Maya sighed out. Eve nodded in agreement, pulling a tight smile across her face. On having briefly glanced over at the couple who already looked completely enamored with each other. Come on, love. There are a few people I want to introduce you to, Maya said, walking toward a cluster of women. Introductions. Pleasantries. And in small gossip consumed the next hour or so before Eve managed to excuse herself. She slipped through the crowd before arriving at the bar. She ordered herself a glass of water. Taking a moment to rest, she leant back against the bar, taking a sip from her glass and surveying the room. Hey there. Care for a dance? A man said, walking in her direction. No, thank you. I'm good. Eve replied, turning back to the room. Aw, come on. Don't be a party pooper, he said, throwing an arm around her shoulders. I am sure that there are other women here who are much better dancers than me and would like to dance with you. Perhaps you should go and ask someone else, Eve said firmly as she stepped out of his grasp. Well, I'm not asking someone else, am I? You're acting very rude. You know, the man said, once again stepping closer. Eve could smell the stench of whiskey on his breath and see the stains on his shirt. I said no. Now back off, Eve said harshly. She was done trying to be polite. Do you Eve? Are you okay? Curtis interrupted the man and placed his hand on Eve's shoulder. I was just telling this person that I don't want to dance with him and that he ought to buzz off. Eve glared at the man as she spoke. Well, I suppose you have your answer then, friend. She does not want to dance with you. Have a good night, Curtis said, leaving the man standing at the bar looking gobsmacked. The pair weaved through the crowd and disappeared from the man's view. Do you want to get some air? Curtis leaned over and spoke into Eve's ear so she could hear him over the loud music and chatter filling the room. She gave him a quick nod, and the two headed towards the exit. The cool night air caused the skin on Eve's arms to prickle. And the hairs stood on end. Sorry. I should not have left you alone for so long, Curtis said, rubbing the back of his neck. It's all right. I have been having a good time. Your mum sure loves to gossip. Eve smiled as she replied, Yeah. She does. This is probably going to seem super awkward considering you basically told that last guy to get lost, but I was going to ask before, so I feel like I should just go through with it. So yeah, Curtis said, speaking so fast, Eve only just managed to understand the words coming out of his mouth. Curtis, you're rambling, Eve said. Yeah, of course. I suppose I was just wondering, would you want to have a dance? A dance with me, that is... Curtis finally managed to ask, cringing at the way he sounded. Yes, I would. Eve smirked as she spoke. Are you sure I don't want you to feel pressured into saying yes? Curtis asked, concerned. Yep, I'm sure, Eve said, confident in her answer. Well, all right then, Curtis said, although he still felt kind of weird for asking. Eve held out her hand for him to take as a smile grew ever wider on her face. In return, a grin spread across Curtis's face as he reached out to grasp her outstretched hand. Eve stepped forward so that there was only a small gap between herself and Curtis. After a moment of hesitation, Curtis grabbed Eve's other hand and the pair began to sway. From an outside view, the attempt at dancing probably seemed almost comical and bordering on childlike. However, for the pair it was anything but. Eve leaned in even closer, resting her head on Curtis's chest as she was overcome with emotion. She felt tired, and she just wanted someone to hold her in that moment. She just wanted someone to love and someone to love her back. Someone to be vulnerable and intimate with. The nerves causing Curtis's stomach to twist and turn settled as Eve leaned forward into him. Both of her hands were still cupped in his as he let his head drop to rest on top of hers. Somewhere along the way, She had managed to worm her way into his heart, although he was only recognizing it now. Curtis let his eyes close as contentment washed over him. The rhythmic swaying and the body pressed up against him were the only things he thought of, feeling the weight of Curtis's head on top of her own. Eve enjoyed the moment of intimacy before stepping back from his grasp. Tears gathered at the edges of her eyes as Curtis looked at her confused. "Eve, are you okay?" he asked, reaching out to bring her back into his embrace. "I'm sorry. I can't," she said, tears having escaped and running down her cheeks. "I'm sorry. I can't," she said, tears having escaped and running down her cheeks. "Can't what? What are you talking about?" Curtis asked as he became anxious over Eve's sudden change in demeanor. Eve just shook her head as more tears flowed freely down her face. Maya's makeup completely ruined as the tears were tinted black with mascara. "Eve, I can't help you if I don't know what is wrong in the first place," Curtis said, desperately trying to understand what was happening. Us, dancing together. It can't happen." Eve cried out. "It's just a dance, Eve. There isn't anything to be upset over," Curtis said, once again reaching out. "It's not just a dance," Eve said, shaking her head. "No, perhaps not. But if you don't want it to be more than a dance, I'm okay with that. I just want you to be comfortable and maybe even happy. But I still don't understand why you are so upset all of the sudden," Curtis said, conceding to her point. "I cannot be the person that stands in the way of whoever you are meant to be with. And I don't think I could be tossed to the side again. I don't think I could survive it," Eve said, her voice getting louder with frustration. "Is that what's got you all upset? That I have a mate out there somewhere, and you think that it would end up poorly if I found them, if something happened here between us?" Curtis said as the tension on his forehead dissipated. Eve nodded in affirmation. "Oh. Okay then. I wish you had said something before then. I could have told you not to worry," Curtis said with a smile. "What?" Eve said, sniffing. "Eve, I met my mate the day I turned 18 over 4 years ago. We tried to make it work for a few months. But she couldn't bear the thought of living the rest of her life without a permanent pack. It was just too much for her. So, we decided that it would be best if she went back to her family. I haven't seen her since," Curtis said simply. "Oh. I feel kind of silly now," Eve said, trying to wipe away her tears. "I thought you would have guessed considering what I told you about my parents and how it is difficult for council members to maintain their mate bond," Curtis said, smiling and stepping forward to pull Eve into a hug. "Well, clearly not," Eve said as she buried her face into Curtis's chest, trying to hide her embarrassment. "Do you miss her?" Eve asked him after a few moments of silence. Yeah, sometimes. But I think I just wanted her to be happy, and she would never have been happy with me. There was no way I could give her the life she wanted and deserved. Last I heard. She is married to her childhood sweetheart now, and they are expecting their first child, so I like to think that everything turned out the way it was meant to," Curtis said as he tightened his hold around Eve's shoulders. Her face fully squished against his chest. "Oh, does it still hurt?" Eve asked, almost scared to hear his response. "It did. It used to hurt so bad. Not anymore, though. I moved on. And when I did, the pain dulled, and eventually, one morning I woke up. That feeling just wasn't there anymore," Curtis said with a shrug. "How did you know you had moved on?" Eve asked quietly. "What if she never managed to? It was only something I saw in retrospect. One day, you will be able to look back and see that you have moved on too." Curtis said simply, "I'm scared that I'll be stuck as this shadow of myself, that I'll never be able to crawl out of this hole I seem to be stuck in," Eve confessed as she tightened her grip around Curtis's waist. "Eve, from the day I met you, I have seen a spark within you grow and grow. I know you are worried, but have no doubt that I have all confidence in you. And if you'll let me, I want to keep supporting you as a coach, as a friend, and maybe more." Curtis spoke with rawness audible in his voice. "Curtis." Eve breathed out. "It's okay. I know that now isn't the right time. But I'd kick myself if I didn't tell you that. Only if you want, of course. I'll be here for you. In whatever capacity you need. And if someday you want this to be more than a dance, Curtis trailed off with a nod as Eve glanced up at him. Thank you. Thank you so much for everything that you have done for me. And thank you for waiting for me. One day. I promise, just not yet. Eve whispered as she reached up and gently pecked Curtis's cheek. She stepped back out of the embrace. And with a small smile, she retreated back into the party in search of a bathroom to attempt to salvage her makeup. Curtis remained outside, his feet cemented to the ground. Slowly, as if he was trying to relive the moment, he reached his hand up to trace his cheek. A disbelieving smile overcame his mouth. He knew in that moment that even if Eve asked him to wait a lifetime, the time would pass, and at the end he would still be there for her. Somehow, sometime, Eve had become an overwhelming part of his world. Eve had started another drawing a few days after they had returned to the mountain. Looking down, she smiled at the progress she had made on the art piece over the last few hours. It was the beginnings of one of her best works yet. Having taken inspiration from the recent trip, on the page, Eve had drawn Maya and Kirk dancing at the ball with the rest of the room hazed out in a blur. When Eve had watched them dance, she knew that was probably how they saw the rest of the world, out of focus, being solely concentrated on each other. It was a beautiful sight to behold. And Eve could not help but try to capture an ounce of the same passion within the drawing. She smiled, remembering the affair of saying farewell to Maya. Now, darlin', you stay safe, okay? Maya said in a serious tone as she pulled Eve into a solid embrace. Of course. We will be just fine. I promise. Eve said, clutching onto Maya's shirt. Please take care of him, honey. I know he gets lonely up there all by himself. That's why I'm so ecstatic that he has you now. Maya lowered her voice as she directed her words to Eve's ear. I know. We are lucky to have each other. And I promise to look after him. Eve said, soothing Maya's worries. I know you will, darlin'. Maya said, stepping back from the embrace and turning to observe the goodbyes of her husband and son. Now, Curtis, I have given Eve strict instructions to keep you in line. So don't mess with her or she will whack you over the head with my permission. Maya tooted. Sure thing, Mum. Curtis chuckled, stepping forward to bid his mum goodbye. Now, you look after yourself and Eve, Maya said as she stood on her tippy toes to reach up to Curtis, who still had to bend down to her height. Absolutely, Mum, Curtis said, giving her a squeeze before stepping back. Kirk had pulled Maya into his side, running his hand up and down her back as Curtis and Eve walked past the tree line and out of their sight. Eve smiled as she reminisced before concentrating back on the details of the drawing before her. She would gift it to Kirk and Maya for Christmas, which would be coming up in the next 2 months. She was sure that Maya would love it. Since they had been back, Curtis had let Eve have her own space, which she was very grateful for. They had fallen back into their usual routine of training in the morning and sharing meals together. Eve often found herself thinking about how they had danced together at the ball, every time she thought about it. She was surprised by how safe and cared for she felt in Curtis's embrace. Eve, Curtis said, walking into the living room. She turned to face him, the drawing and her thoughts forgotten. Yeah, she said, smiling at him. We need to go to town, Curtis said, not returning her smile. Oh. I didn't think we needed to go for another few weeks, Eve said, confused by his seriousness. Eve, I don't want to upset you, and please stay calm until we can find out what is going on. But Alpha Ian sent me an email, and you really need to call your family, Curtis said, gently stepping forward to place his hand on her shoulder. Trying to calm the instant flurry of thoughts running through Eve, took a few deep breaths before giving him a nod. She couldn't open her mouth to reply for fear of letting tears to overrun her eyes. Are you okay? Curtis said with worry clear on his face. Eve shook her head. Okay. We can leave right now if you want, Curtis offered. Eve nodded and stood up to grab her shoes and jacket. Curtis followed her out the door, worried by her silence and lack of reaction to the news he had shared with her. The silence remained as the pair made their way down the mountain. A few times, Curtis opened his mouth to speak but could not find the words to properly comfort Eve. So he kept quiet. Eve was too wrapped in her thoughts to even notice Curtis's concern. What had happened? Were Joanne and her mum still being punished by the Alpha? Had one of them been injured? Once they reached the car and got out onto the highway, Eve felt fidgety being confined in the cab, not feeling as though they were moving fast enough. Anxiety sat in the pit of her stomach. and she tapped her foot against the floor. "We will be there soon. I just want you to know. No matter what happens next, I will be here for you. Always." Curtis said, finally finding words close enough to express his thoughts and feelings. Eve nodded and gave him a tight smile just as the edge of the town came into view. As they pulled over onto the side of the street next to the phone booth, Eve threw herself out of the car before they had even come to a complete stop. She ran over to the box and threw open the door and shakily pushing coins through the slot as a few coins fell to the ground. Hands still unsteady, she punched in the numbers. Her guts wretched and twisted violently as the dial tone echoed in her ears. "Please pick up. Please pick up. Please pick up." After the longest 30 seconds of her life, the dial tone stopped and a voice came through the speaker. "Hello." Joanne picked up the phone, her voice croaky. "Joanne, it's me." "What's going on?" Eve interrogated her. Speaking a million miles a minute. "Eve." "Oh, baby." Joanne cried, holding back sobs. "Joanne, please tell me." Eve said, tears streaming down her face. "Baby. Your mum. I'm so sorry. She's gone." Marie sobbed into the phone. Eve couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from her hands. She sank to the ground. She screamed. It was filled with grief, sorrow, and unbelievable pain. And then she screamed some more. Curtis jumped into the booth, crouching down to pull Eve into his arms. She could see him talking but could not hear anything over the ringing in her ears. She just gripped onto his shirt in desperation, begging to be told this was a dream, this was a lie. She saw him reach for the phone and bring it up to his ear. Curtis pulled Eve in closer as Joanne spoke to him. As realization overcame him as Joanne spoke, Curtis pulled Eve in even closer to his body. He felt sick as he looked down at Eve's broken form in his arms. It almost seemed as though all of the strength she had built up over the last few months had vanished within a split second. She was more broken in that moment than when he had first found her at his door. He knew. No matter what he did, there was nothing he could do to make her feel better. But he would be there for her, just like he had promised today and the day he told Eve his feelings for her. A small slither of yellow morning sun crept past the curtains and landed on the side of Eve's face, scrunching up her nose. She rolled over, trying desperately to remain in blissful and ignorant sleep for just a few moments longer before reality overtook her conscious mind. But it was too late, and the events of the previous day. Instantly. It felt as though her whole body was weighed down and that she was stuck to the mattress. This pain, this heartache, was worse than anything she had ever felt before. Being rejected had only been a fraction of this pain. Her mum was gone. Forever. She would never feel the embrace of her mum again. Never would her mum lay a kiss on her forehead. Never would Eve be the same or completely whole. No amount of training and strength would allow her to overcome this loss. She could not help but be consumed by memories of the past, memories from a lifetime ago. "Evie, I'm gonna get you." Marie called out, pretending not to hear the giggling toddler hiding in the laundry cupboard. I wonder she could be," Marie said, rubbing her forehead, feigning confusion while the little girl struggled to contain her laughter. Raw, I'm gonna eat you all up, you little munchin," Marie yelled, pulling the door open and eliciting screams from her daughter. Reaching forward, she grabbed Evie under her armpits and pulled her out to spin in a circle. Evie screamed in happiness as Marie put her on the ground and tickled her sides with her nimble fingers. "No, Mummy, stop. It tickles." "Ah," Evie screeched in delight. "All right, my baby. Just because you asked so nicely." Marie laughed at Evie. "Mummy, I love you." "Evie," said, pulling Marie into a hug. "Oh, Possum, I love you more than I could ever say," Joanne said, placing her lips on Evie's hair. "Now, what do you want for lunch?" Joanne said, sweeping Evie up into her arms and heading towards the kitchen. Eve finally opened her eyes, a small, yet sad, smile on her face, gathering her energy. She sat up and swung her legs over the side of the bed, trying to gather the will to face the day, knowing that her mum no longer walked the earth. She made her way to the kitchen where Curtis was preparing breakfast. He turned as she entered, surprised to see that she was out of bed so early. He had checked on her multiple times throughout the night to see her having nightmares. He had comforted her each time. but no doubt she was emotionally and physically exhausted, just as he was. "I made breakfast," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat at the table. She nodded in reply and sat down in front of a plate with eggs, toast, and a small portion of bacon. She pushed the food around her plate, unenthusiastic even though it was her favorite breakfast. She took a few bites before putting her knife and fork down on the table. "So, Joanne said the funeral is going to be in 2 days," Curtis said gently, trying to broach the subject with Eve. After a moment's hesitation, Eve nodded once. "I contacted Alpha Ian. He said that we could meet up with him and travel to Emerald Eye for the funeral if you want." Curtis spoke gently, taking a sip of his morning tea. After another moment of silence, Eve replied, "How? There is no way they will let me back into the pack territory after the way I left, and if they do, they'll probably just lock me up," she said, looking dejected. "You don't need to worry about that. You have every right to go back to Morn, and you'll have the protection of the council on your side. I'll make sure that they can't touch you, I promise." Curtis, leaning over the table to grab onto her hand. The council can do that," Eve asked, shocked. "There are regulations in place for this kind of thing, to protect individuals who had to flee their pack for whatever reason," Curtis said whilst nodding, giving him an appreciative smile. Eve turned back to her food and took a few more bites of her food. As she finished eating, Eve moved to the kitchen and began to wash the dishes as Curtis dried and put them away. Eve enjoyed the calm quietness and the mundaneness of the task in front of her. As she scrubbed a pan, she spoke her thoughts out loud. "My mum used to take me to get ice cream every Friday afternoon when I was little. Every time she would ask what flavor I wanted, and each week I would always get Rocky Road. She would just laugh and smile. Then she would say that Rocky Road sounded pretty good to her. So we would both have a scoop of Rocky Road. I don't know why we stopped going. I can't remember why," Eve said. "She sounds like such a great mum." Curtis said, happy she was able to open up to him. "The best?" Eve nodded in agreement. "Rocky Road is a good flavor, but Hokey Pokey is my favorite flavor." Curtis smirked at her. "I'm going to have to disagree with you there." Eve gave him a soft smile. "Maybe I'll just have to reassess my choices and get some Rocky Road ice cream soon," Curtis said. They fell back into a serene silence. They spent the rest of the day together, only making small talk, Eve occasionally bringing up memories from her childhood. They rearranged the bookshelves, did laundry, made lunch together, and pottered around the house. For a day that she expected to be one of the worst of her life, Eve felt surprising, content, and safe. Eve and Curtis meet up with Alpha Ian, his mate, and a few of his pack members in the town outside of the Emerald Eye Pack territory. Together, they approached the pack territory down the main road that led to the center of the pack's township. In the distance, she could see a group of people ready to greet them. She tensed up, nervous about the confrontation that was about to occur. Curtis noticed her uneasiness and reached down to squeeze her hand, hoping to give her some comfort. Alpha Ian also glanced back. He was worried about the danger Eve faced and the repercussions he could possibly face, despite the reassurances that Curtis had given him about the council's protection. The group came to a stop a few meters before the welcoming party. Alpha Blake stepped forward from the group. Eve could see Adrian standing behind him as well. "Alpha Ian, welcome to Emerald Eye. My condolences for your loss. Although I must say I did not expect your entourage to be so large," Blake said, looking directly at Eve. Alpha Ian glanced back at Eve before shrugging at Alpha Blake. "Unfortunately, Evie, I cannot allow you entry to my pack. Who knows what kind of danger you pose to us considering how you left. I can't take that risk." Blake spoke with a malicious glint in his eyes. "Alpha Blake. My name is Curtis Richards, representative from the council. I am here to escort Miss Harmons to the funeral of Marie Harmons. It is my responsibility to make sure she is afforded the right to farewell her mother whilst she and your pack remains safe." Curtis interrupted. "Mr. Richards, that is all and well, but I still cannot let Evie into my pack with good conscience." Blake said. "Here is the thing, Alpha. There are regulations in place that outline Miss Harmon's rights to attend this funeral, considering the poor treatment that you have subjected her to. But what you should really concern yourself with is the legitimacy of your position as Alpha of Emerald Eye," Curtis said with a straight face. You cannot be serious. Blake barked out with a harsh laugh. Unfortunately, I am. Miss Harmons is the true firstborn of the previous alpha, meaning that it is her right to take over the leadership of this pack if she so choose. Curtis stated simply. Blake began to speak. But we are willing to make a bargain with you. Should Miss Harmons be allowed entry to the pack grounds in order to attend the funeral of her mother, she is willing to renounce her claim to the position, Curtis said, cutting off Blake. She would never be able to take the lead of my pack, Blake said furiously. Only being held back by Luna Ariel putting a hand on his shoulder. She leaned up and spoke softly into his ear. After a heated whispered argument, Blake turned back around to face Curtis and Eve again. Fine. You will be escorted to the residence of Marie Harmons and stay there under supervision until the funeral. Immediately afterwards you will leave and not return. Alpha Blake said, seething before turning and storming off. Curtis gave Eve a brief smile before they continued forward in the direction of Eve's old home. Curtis stayed close to her side, making sure that she knew he would keep her safe. Alpha Ian and his pack members headed towards the main pack house as Eve and Curtis split off and headed towards the small cabin on the edge of the pack territory. As they got close to the small home, the front door swung open to reveal Joanne. Seeing Eve approach, she let out a strangled cry before running forward, almost falling over. Eve ran forward to fall into Joanne's embrace. The pair sank to the ground, crying, unable to get any words out through their tears. Curtis stood back to let the women reunite and comfort each other. When the two pulled apart and stood up, Eve turned to introduce Joanne to Curtis. Joanne, this is Curtis. He has been helping me out over the last few months. He has been a great friend to me, Eve said, still hugging Joanne from the side. Come here, sweetie. I'm so happy to meet you, Joanne said, stepping forward and pulling Curtis down to her height to give him a squeezing hug and a kiss on each of his cheeks. Nice to meet you too, Curtis said, returning the hug. Come inside, you two. I'll get you a drink and something to eat, Joanne said, grabbing both of their hands and leading them to the front door. Once they were settled at the kitchen bench, hot cups of tea in hand, Eve finally managed to ask the question that had been weighing her down. Joanne, please. I have to know what happened, she said, her voice cracking. Joanne paused, her hands hovering over the mug in front of her. It seemed as though she had stopped breathing for a moment. She closed her eyes, took in a deep breath before speaking. Pumpkin, you know that your mom struggled for a long time after the rejection. I think it all just became too much for her in the end. I came to see her that morning and I found her still in bed. I thought she was just asleep. Joanne finished with a small cry. I'm glad she went in her sleep at least, Eve said, wiping a lonely tear away from her cheek. Yeah. I don't know what I'm going to do without her, Joanne whispered in a broken voice. Do you want to stay here? Curtis quietly spoke up. How could I stay here with everything they have made my family suffer? No. No, I do not want to stay. But I will never be given permission to leave, Joanne said. I can help if you want me to. You will have the support of the council, considering the mistreatment of your family at the hands of the leaders of this pack. You can be happy somewhere else, Curtis said, reaching over to grab Joanne's hand in his own. Oh my God. Thank you, Curtis. Thank you so much, Joanne said, jumping out her chair and pulling Curtis into a tight hug. As they pulled apart, Curtis gave her a comforting smile and a small nod of his head. Over the next few hours, the three slowly made their way around the house, packing up some of Marie's most precious items, including some of her paintings and an album full of photos of Eve as a child. Eve stood in the studio gazing at her mum's latest painting, a large portrait of Eve. Her mum's masterpiece, it seemed. A small knock on the door pulled her out of her amazement. She was very talented, Curtis said. Yeah. She was. Eve smiled in agreement. It's time to go. The funeral will be starting soon, he said gently. Okay. She nodded. Together with Joanne, the three left behind the small cabin with a pile of brown boxes in the living room. It seemed almost lifeless. A shovel of dirt landed on top of the wooden box sitting in the hole in the dirt, in the cold and dead ground. It was a sign of finality. The final resting place of Marie Harmons, beloved by her family, Her grave sat in the far corner of the small cemetery on the Pack lands. It was a quiet place, a place that Eve hoped would bring her mum the peace that she had long deserved. A peaceful death was the least that she deserved after a lifetime of pain and suffering. Joanne squeezed Eve's hand. There were not any words that they could share in that moment. Their feelings could not be simply summed up with words, with a singular nod. Eve turned away and began to exit the cemetery, Curtis and Joanne following at her side. They were silent, taking comfort in the presence of each other. Their calm was not destined to last. However, awaiting them at the low gates of the cemetery stood a group of warriors along with the Alpha, Beta, and their mates. Alpha Blake, we are leaving as you requested. The funeral is over. We will depart, Curtis said, stepping just in front of Eve and Marie. Blake said nothing, instead pushing forward the girl that stood beside Adrian. She looked unsure but turned to face the three at the harsh look from her Alpha. I am Emily Haynes, Beta female of this pack. I declare a challenge to you for the right to claim Adrian Alfort as a mate. She spoke strongly, yet there was hesitancy hidden below. Now Curtis started. Are you serious? You are joking, right? You challenge me for a mate that never wanted me. A mate. Frankly, I do not want. Not only that, you challenge me moments after I watched my mum's body be lowered into the ground. This is what you want. Eve spoke, completely overrun by rage and grief. Emily looked taken aback for a moment. Yes. The challenge has been given. Do you accept? Emily managed to stutter out, practically feeling the glare of Alpha Blake at her back. Fine. I will fight you and I will win. But I will not become the mate of him. He is not worthy of me. You will be stuck with him. Eve said, the bite of her words making Emily flinch back slightly. With an angry huff, Eve stalked past the group, blocking her way, and toward the small clearing of grass at the center of buildings of the town. Curtis stood shocked for a moment before hurrying off in Eve's wake. Eve. Please wait just a second, he called out once he was only a few meters behind her. She slowed down, trying to focus on preventing the tears from leaking out her eyes. She turned to face him. I know that this is something you need to do. I would never try to talk you out of something that you need to do. But I just want you to know I am here for you. I know you're hurting at the moment. Just don't let your pain make you lose focus. Curtis said with an understanding nod. I've got this. You have taught me well. Eve said reassuringly. Okay. Let's go then, Curtis said with a little smile. As Joanne caught up to them, she started speaking rapidly. After a few moments of reassurance, she shakily agreed that she would stay out of the fight, no matter what happened. Eve kissed her cheek as a brief goodbye as they reached the clearing where members of the pack had gathered. Eve glanced around, recognizing quite a few faces that looked at her with pity. These people had been her family. They had watched her grow up. They had been constant features in her life up until a few months ago. She shot them a bittersweet smile before walking to the middle of the loose circle of people. Emily followed her into the impromptu fighting ring as Eve shrugged off her jacket and slipped her shoes off. After a moment of consideration, she pulled a hair tie from her pocket and swiftly pulled her hair into a low ponytail. Emily followed her lead, removing her shoes and jacket. They stood across from each other as Blake stepped forward. Ready, he asked the two. They nodded in affirmation. Okay, begin, Blake said, stepping back into the wall of people. Immediately, Emily lunged forward, trying to catch Eve off guard. Eve stepped to the side out of the path of harm. Swiftly, Emily turned back to face her, with a look of determination cemented on her face. She was wary now that she had seen the obvious speed that Eve possessed, but clearly not wary enough as she jumped forward once again. This time, instead of jumping out of the way, Eve bent her knees and sunk her weight down to the ground, as Emily's fist flew towards her head. Eve ducked and kicked down towards her knees. She was not going to hold back. As Emily buckled and started to fall, Eve threw her fist out with her upper body twisting out to connect with her abdomen. She jumped back as Emily threw a wild and uncoordinated punch. Emily jumped to her feet, trying to stay light on her feet as she tried to suck in deep breaths. She stepped back warily as she took in Eve standing in front of her. Eve did not give her the opportunity to find her footing properly. She lunged forward like a blurred streak and landed a solid punch again. Within a moment, Emily was pinned to the ground with Eve holding her arms down under her knees with hands pushing threateningly on Emily's throat. We are done here. It's over. Eve spat out, leaning down to put her face right in front of Emily's, who nodded in submission. With a huff, Eve stood up to face the crowd. "Is that what you wanted, huh? Are you happy?" Eve spat out in Blake's direction. He turned and started to walk away. "No, you do not get to walk away from this. Everyone here is going to hear what I have to say." Eve called out, making him stop in his track. "You are the reason we are here after all, aren't you? You were the one who forced my mate to reject me. And then you felt threatened by me. So you made this replacement fight me to justify your actions. You are just as bad as your father, or wait, our father. The man who refused to acknowledge and tortured my mother up until the moment she died." Eve spat out, evoking a shocked gasp from the crowd, who started to murmur amongst themselves. "I did the best for my pack. You would never be enough to lead these people," Blake said, whipping back around as his voice dripped with venom. "How would you know? You have never known me. What reason could I have possibly given you to make you think I would be inadequate?" She shook her head as she questioned him. Before he could speak, Curtis stepped forward. "The council has reviewed leadership of this pack over the last few decades, and it is clear to us that there has been moves taken that directly go against the wishes of the moon goddess. As such, authorities will be moving in to monitor the progress of this pack. Now the fight is over and we shall be departing. Alpha Blake, I suggest you move on and focus on your role as Alpha for now," Curtis said in a flat voice whilst pulling Eve to his side. "You have got to be joking, you." Blake began to step forward as Luna Ariel put a hand on his arm to stop his advance. "Thank you. We look forward to receiving this representative. I'm sure that they will do the best for our pack," Ariel said, silencing her mate with a steely glare. With a nod of respect, Curtis and Eve turned to leave. "Evie." Adrian finally broke his silence. Eve looked back. Adrian stood just behind Blake, having left Emily on the ground. He seemed to not even have looked at her since the fight had been concluded. He hesitated, opening and closing his mouth a few times. "Say what you have to say and get it over with," Eve said with a shake of her head. I'm sorry," he said, looking down with shame. "Oh, are you? You are sorry for all the pain that I have suffered through. The pain that ripped me apart every time you had a relationship with another person. You're sorry for forcing me to flee from my family and from my home. My face got torn apart by rouges as I ran for my freedom and life. Or maybe you're just sorry for being weak and rejecting me. I do not care. Whatever the answer may be, you did me a favor, truly. I'm better off without you." Eve turned and walked off. She did not need to hear his response. Eve was relieved when they had got back to the cabin. The trip there had been uneventful. Although it had been difficult to say goodbye to Joanne as they had left her at Alpha Ian's pack, Eve knew she would be happy there with some family. She had already started to help out around in the kitchens when she had free time. Before long, she would be completely settled in, and Eve was happy for that. She sat out on the front steps of the cabin, waiting for the sun to fall below the trees. Despite all of the pain she was still feeling, she somehow felt at peace. More at peace than she had been in months. The boards creaked as Curtis stepped outside and lowered himself down to the ground next to her. "How are you feeling?" he said as he stretched his arms up with a satisfied groan. "Good. I think," she replied with a soft smile. They sat together in silence, a comfortable and embracing silence, hesitating for a moment. Eve slowly reached out and placed her hand over Curtis's hand that rested on his knee. Curtis tried not to smile too widely, but he physically couldn't restrain the muscles in his cheeks. "I'm happy here. With you. You make me happy." Eve spoke with a little insecurity. Curtis turned to face her as she kept gazing forward. "You make me happy too," he said into the quietness that surrounded them. Finally, she turned to meet his gaze and returned. She knew, in every ounce of her being, that this was where she was meant to be. Curtis was the one who she would spend the rest of her life with, loved, appreciated, and understood. "Thank you for everything that you have done for me. You gave me that chance to become myself again," Eve whispered, leaning forward so that their foreheads were pressed together. "No. Thank you for everything that you have done for me," Curtis replied, his eyes closed, embracing the closeness of Eve. Reaching up delicately, she placed the palm of her hand on his cheek. Leaning forward, she placed a soft kiss on his lips. It was brief, but filled with care. Together, They sat in a silent embrace as the sky turned dark and the stars appeared overhead.